Yes, that's a misunderstanding. That's a misunderstanding. It happens with almost any faction, by the way. Almost every faction, it happens. This idea that I'm either on this side or on that side, aligned with this one or aligned with that one. I remember seeing a tweet one time from a socialist who was warning all of his comrades about me, saying this man is not our ally, which is true. Of course, it's true. But he had to say that to the socialists because, or the leftists or what have you. They will listen to a portion of what I say or some of the positions that I articulate, and they'll automatically think that I'm an ally of the socialists or an ally of the leftists or, again, whatever faction you're talking about. This is what happens. So he wanted to warn them that no, Shaheed says plenty of other things that you won't like. So don't think that he's your ally. He's not on our dogma. They're always trying to identify who is and who isn't an ally. It makes you think that they're only involved in political activism to socialize. Like they're only involved in political activism to find a friend group or something. Like all your political factions are just mean girls at the high school cafeteria, Nobody needs to be your friend. I'm not your friend. I'm not your ally. Not yours, not theirs, not anyone's. That's not a statement of hostility, by the way. It's not a statement of hostility. It's just a statement of function. Alhamdulillah, I'm a Muslim. Alhamdulillah, I'm a Muslim. I've talked before about this concept of bearing witness, shahada, testimony, testifying. Shahada. And shahada also means martyrdom. Because in order to be a true witness, a true, pure, honest witness, you have to sacrifice yourself in your testimony. Not sacrifice your life, but yourself, your preferences, your opinions, and so forth. Like I've talked about before. What you want to be true, you sacrifice that. What you like, what you dislike, who you want to win, who you want to lose, and so forth. You take all of that and you remove it. And then you describe what you see and what you have seen as it actually is. That's what I try to do. Just talk about what actually is. So when you watch me talk about, for example, the wrongs that were done to Iran, you might think that I'm pro-Iran, but you've misread me. Or when I talk about wrongs being done to the working class in America or in the West generally, you think that, I'm one of you. No, you misread me. Or when I talk about what's been done and what's being done, for example, to African Americans or to any other so-called minority group in that country, members of the global majority in the West. I'm not being an advocate. I'm not being an ally. I'm being a Muslim, alhamdulillah. I'm being a Muslim and I'm being a witness. You understand? When I articulate the civilizational grievances of the global South and some leftist or some diaspora activist thinks that they found an ally, no, they've made an error. I'm not your ally. This isn't about you and it's not about your cause. This is about what Islam requires of me. You have been wronged, for example, and that's all I said. I didn't say that you're right. I didn't say that you're noble. I didn't say that your cause is clean or that your hands are clean. And I didn't say that I'm going to choose your side in the next dispute. I said that you were wronged in this instance by this action. That's the full extent of the statement, no more, no less. Like I've said before, like with Iran again. Iran has done severe damage to the region. It's done so for many years, for decades. And I'll say that. But also the military assault against them is also wrong. And I'll say that too. Both things are true. The first one doesn't give license to the second one. The second one doesn't cancel out the first one. You can hold both of those things simultaneously without contradiction because they're both factually true. And I'm not working from loyalty. You understand? I'm working from, inshallah, impartial honesty. That's the problem with most people who engage with the world and most people who engage in activism and analysis. You don't operate from a fixed standard. Everything is about who you're rooting for. And when you're rooting for someone, then the truth becomes a threat. The truth becomes secondary, at least, and it also can become a threat. Honesty becomes a threat because the truth doesn't have to align with you. You have to align with the truth. That's the way it's supposed to work. But why do you even need me to be your ally in the first place? Me or anyone else? I mean, think about it. Because if you think about it, it is extremely revealing about your relationship with the truth. Truth doesn't need allies. Truth is the truth regardless. If something wrong was done to you, then that is true regardless of whether I like you or not, whether I stand with you or not, whether I march with you or vote with you or ally with you or what have you. You understand? The wrongness of the act exists independently of my affiliation, independently of everyone's affiliation. It doesn't matter. It's not wrong because enough people agreed that it's wrong. It just is wrong by an objective standard. Not because you say so, not because I say so. And whoever cares about right and wrong will object to it on the basis of their own alignment with the truth, even if they don't have any kind of relationship with you. No relationship is needed for someone to stand up for the truth. But see, this is how you do, because you don't have a fixed, objective, non-personalized concept of the truth, not a non-personalized, objective concept of morality. You don't want people to be loyal to the truth, actually. You want them to be loyal to you. You want them to be loyal to you. You want them to be loyal to your group, to your faction, to your ideology, to your dogma. And this is also, by the way, always the same mentality as the oppressor, or as the people, or as the faction, or as the ideology that has done you wrong. It's the same mentality. You understand? Just like them, you will filter out what agrees with you and what disagrees with you from my analysis, from what I say. And then you'll decide based on that whether or not I should be listened to or not, based on how much what I say aligns with you and your faction and your ideology and your dogma and so on. You understand? Like, you like or dislike what I say because you are subjective. But I say what I say because, inshallah, I am objective. See, what you are actually communicating when you need me to be on your side before you will listen to or accept my analysis is that you don't fully trust that the truth can do the work on its own. You need social reinforcement. You accept the truth when it coincides with loyalty, when it coincides with sympathy and with allyship. In other words, when the loyalty coincidentally includes honesty, but the loyalty is the main thing for you. Because in your world, that's how legitimacy is established, by the numbers, by group size, by popularity. Because you have no respect for objective truth in reality. You don't even think it exists. You have no objective moral standard. You have no objective moral framework, no moral yardstick. Nothing is right or wrong unless enough people think so. Unless enough people think it's right or wrong. This is a Western epistemological problem. The West does not have a fixed standard of truth. It has competing interest groups, each with their own narrative, trying to recruit enough adherents to their side so that their version of reality achieves dominance. And then it becomes the official truth. You don't win an argument by being right. You win the argument by getting enough people, enough credible voices to sign on to your version. And so in that world, an ally is not just a friend, is not just a supporter. An ally is evidence. They're an asset. So you're in a constant search for those types of assets. This one can be an ally, that one can be an ally. It's the same mentality of resource acquisition that characterizes the totality of Western so-called civilization that gave rise to colonization in the first place. It's the same mentality. It's the same mentality. That's why you need me to be your ally. That's why you need me or anyone else to be your allies. Not for the truth, for the optics of the truth. You understand? And I refuse that role. I refuse that role completely. I've watched this dynamic destroy movement after movement after movement, destroy thinker after thinker after thinker. The moment you start calibrating truth based on who's in the coalition, you've already lost. Because the coalition has needs, the coalition has feelings, right? The coalition has internal contradictions that they need to paper over. They need everyone to be satisfied. You need everyone to be a loyal member. So that's what you do. The factional loyalty trap. And it operates everywhere, across left and right, across racial and ethnic lines, across ideological movements. The rule is always the same. You are not allowed to say the true thing if the true thing embarrasses the faction. If it goes against the agenda and the interests of the faction, then you will lose your standing, you'll lose your credibility, you'll lose your platform, you'll lose your access. The moment that you step outside the perimeter of approved positions of the faction. They can't examine the ways that they demand ideological compliance from the very communities that they claim to want to liberate. You have to be like us. You have to believe like us. Otherwise, we're not going to even work to liberate you. The so-called pro-resistance camp cannot interrogate the ways that they actually serve the same old colonizer agendas that they claim to oppose. You can't say it. You can't talk about it. Loyalty to the faction supersedes loyalty to the truth. And they call this solidarity. This is their version of solidarity. It's not solidarity. It's the institutionalization of dishonesty. Because real solidarity doesn't require you to lie. If your coalition cannot hold itself together except by agreeing what not to say, that's not solidarity. That's a conspiracy of convenience. You understand me? So when you have that mentality of a scavenger, scavenging for allies, when you watch Middle Nation content, you are not actually engaging sincerely with the analysis. You're evaluating my tribal membership. Whose team is he on? And if the answer isn't your team, then the analysis gets discarded. Gets discarded, not refuted, discarded. You don't argue with it. You just withdraw your endorsement and move on to someone else who's willing to say what you want. Because truth for you is instrumental. It's instrumentalized. It's just a tool that you pick up when it serves you and you put down when it doesn't serve you. It's a weapon that you will deploy against your enemies, but it's not a standard that you will hold yourself to. And when someone comes along who holds it as a standard and who will apply it regardless of who it lands on, well, that person becomes a problem. They can't be controlled. They won't stay on the script. I'm not neutral, by the way. I'm not neutral. That's all. That's another misreading. Neutrality means equidistance. It means not declaring anything right or wrong. I'll call out wrong. I will call out injustice. I will name the crime. I'm not neutral, but I am impartial. There's a difference. Impartial means that the position that you do take is not determined by who is involved, but by the facts and by the truth. And this principle will apply regardless of the players. And when the principle lands against you, even if you are the wronged party, I will still say it. The question is not whether or not I am on your side or not on your side. The question is whether your side is on the side of the truth. That's the only thing. That's how you'll know which side I'm going to be on, inshallah. When I describe injustices committed against you, against African Americans, for example, wrongs committed against working class Americans, wrongs committed against so-called minority communities in the West, against the victims of the Western system and the Western power structure, I'm not issuing those people or those demographics or those populations a certificate of innocence. You seem to think that those two things are the same thing. They're not. Victimhood is not innocence. You were wronged and you do wrong. Yes, you do. Both are true simultaneously. And they're not contradictory statements. It's a complete picture. It's the full picture. You understand? And you'll accept the first half and you'll reject the second half with precisely the same energy that your elites reject the whole thing. You have a different position in the hierarchy, but you have identical psychological reflexes. My critique of Western so-called civilization is not directed exclusively at your ruling class. No, it is not. They're not directed only at your governments and your corporations and your military apparatus. I'm talking about the whole society, the whole culture, the collective culture, including you, including the West victims who live in the West. And the moment that becomes clear to you, then you react identically to your elites. The same defensiveness, the same deflection, the same accusation that, oh, Brother Shaheed, you used to make sense. I used to agree with you until you said that, which tells me that the values are not the difference between you and your elites, just the power, just the access to power. I mean, let's talk about your society, your so-called civilization, what it is, what it does, what it produces. This is what you call civilization. The United States of America, the flagship of Western so-called civilization, the self-declared leader of the free world, holds approximately 2 million people in cages right now. That's 25%, or roughly 25% of the entire world's prison population in a country that is only 4% of the world's population. Those two figures sitting together tell you everything that you need to know about the distance between the rhetoric of America and the reality of America. No other country on earth, not China, not Russia, not any of the nations that you condemn in your so-called human rights reports and so forth, no other country comes even close to your numbers of incarcerated people. 20,000 people are murdered in the United States of America every year. 600,000 people are raped every year in your country. More than 80,000 people died from drug overdoses just last year alone. And that number has been climbing for 2 decades straight while your institutions debated and deliberated and held hearings and nothing was done except for the problem to get worse. 150 people die in workplace accidents every single day, every day in your country. And that's a conservative figure. You know, the United States Surgeon General declared that loneliness is a public health crisis in 2023. The Surgeon General, a formal official declaration that your society has become so atomized, so broken in its most basic social fabric that isolation has itself become a medical emergency nationwide. With all your social media, all your technology, all your social networks, all your connectivity, your WhatsApp, instant messaging, and so forth, your constant online oversharing, your parasocial relationships and what have you, well, you would think that you are absolutely flooded with people to talk to, people to relate to, and to build connections with. But roughly half of all Americans report feeling chronic, bottomless loneliness. That's why your antidepressant consumption is so extraordinary. It's off the charts. Why your suicide rate is climbing. 1 in 5 Americans experienced a diagnosed mental illness in any given year. Your children, even your children, are on medication for anxiety, for behavioral disorders, at rates that would have been considered civilizational alarm bells just a generation ago, when I was a kid. And in your public discourse, this isn't even treated as an indictment of your civilization. SubhanAllah, it's treated like a market opportunity. We need to get those kids the drugs that they need to numb them to the miserable reality of the society that we created. That's you. That's your society. I'm telling you, there isn't a single time that you all talk about morality except that it is a performance. 100% of the time it's a performance. It's a performance to cover up your rampant immorality. That's a fact. I've talked about it before many times. You pretend that you care about children. Yes, you pretend that you care about children because you know that civilized people care about children, but you don't care about kids. You don't care about kids. Your kids are in danger and you are the danger to your own children. Your Catholic Church. Need I say more? Your Catholic Church. You know, the ones that launched the Crusades into the Muslim world with all their pious, righteous fury. That same institution that worked in parallel to colonization with their predatory missionaries and whatnot. You all know perfectly well what they've done. You know perfectly well what that Catholic Church has done. If you just look at France, for example, the Catholic Church in France alone, they produced an official commission report in 2021 estimating that 330,000 victims of sexual abuse by the clergy over 7 decades were preyed upon in France alone. Similar findings in Ireland, in Germany, in the UK, in the United States, in Australia, in Poland, wherever the Catholics are. That's institutional, systematic, generational abuse of children in the flagship moral institution of Western civilization. And that institution's first instinct every time, in every place, wherever the abuse happened, without exception, was to protect itself and protect the abusers and transfer the abusers elsewhere and silence the victims. Preserve the structure. It's not an anomaly. That's the operational code of your so-called civilization, expressing itself in the domain of the most vulnerable people. I don't care if you're not Catholic. Doesn't matter if you're not Catholic. I don't care if you're atheist. That is a Western institution that exemplifies so-called Western values. I don't care if you're not Catholic. I don't care if you're Baptist, if you're Protestant, if you're atheist. You talk to me when you stop fetishizing schoolgirl uniforms. No one even stops to question that. No one even stops to interrogate that depraved instinct that you have. I told you that you're dangerous to your children. Yes, you are. Your pornography industry is one of the largest media sectors on this earth. Your pornography industry. The United States is the primary producer and the primary distributor of that filth. The normalization, the industrialization, the gamification of human degradation, built, scaled, and exported by the so-called civilization that lectures the world about human dignity, about respecting women, about women's rights. I mean, we haven't even gotten to what you export to us. I haven't even talked about what you export to the rest of us. We always talk about colonization as extraction, what you took from us. But think about what colonization exported to us. The savagery, the brutality, the violence, the genocide, the genocidal hatred, the dehumanization. We never had that until you came. That's been the West's main export to the civilized world for centuries. For centuries. King Leopold of Belgium, Christian monarch, a man decorated and a man celebrated by Western civilization. Yes, he was. And he oversaw the systematic mutilation, the systematic murder and enslavement of the population of the Congo between 1885 and 1908. The estimates of the dead ranged between 5 to 10 million people. Hands were cut off as proof of bullet expenditure by their troops. Populations worked to death. Villages were burned. And this isn't ancient history. This isn't ancient history. We've got pictures. You understand me? There was a statue of that man in Belgium until protesters had the good sense to tear it down in 2020. I told you, you all talk about Hitler like he was some sort of a horrific anomaly. He wasn't. The Nazis were not strange for you. You've been Nazis everywhere that you went. In fact, the fact that you single out Hitler just proves your hypocrisy. It just shows exactly what you're really about, what you're really like, because the only unique thing about Hitler is that his victims were your own kind. It wasn't about the violence, not the violence. There was nothing unique about the violence. You never objected to the violence. You objected to it being the wrong victims. See, you think that if you condemn Hitler and you condemn the Nazis vehemently enough, you think that you can trick the world into misinterpreting that condemnation as if you are condemning what Hitler did. But you did what he did to people all around the world. You have no problem with genocide. You never have had a problem with genocide. It just depends on who is getting slaughtered. The transatlantic slave trade, where you forcibly removed approximately 12.5 million human beings from Africa over the course of 4 centuries, and millions of them died on those ships in transit over to you, and their survivors, their descendants, were subjected to generations of systemic dehumanization until today, legally, institutionally, religiously justified and upheld by that so-called civilization that produced your so-called enlightenment, your declarations of the rights of man, your universal human values and so forth, your Bill of Rights. That same civilization, that same people at the same time, in some cases, the same individuals who wrote those beautiful words, those founding documents, they themselves owned other human beings as property. And you now, revisionists, you call it a contradiction. It's not a contradiction. It is the operating code expressing itself very clearly. You have no problem whatsoever seeing your fellow human beings as objects. You literally do it all the time. You really should be honest about this. You should be honest about this and about yourselves. You know it's wrong. You know it's horrendous. You know you should not be this way, but that doesn't change you. Just knowing it doesn't change you. Just knowing what civilized people are like does not itself make you civilized. You understand me? Just knowing what morality is, or that morality is a thing, that doesn't itself make you moral. Your so-called civilization is a certain kind of a way. And it has made you that same kind of way. And you have to recognize this in yourselves. But I know you won't. I mean, there are wrongs that you have committed that literally cannot be undone, that cannot be made right. And when there cannot be restitution, there can only be retribution. Do you understand me? Because the debts have to be paid one way or another. I mean, in North America, like I've talked about many times, before the Europeans came, the indigenous population of that continent was estimated to be over 100 million people. And by the end of the 19th century, the U.S. Census counted only 250,000 or less than 250,000. How do you fix that? How do you make that right? Whole indigenous nations wiped out, erased, gone. Who would you even pay restitution to? You were a cataclysm. You were an apocalypse for those people. Do you understand me? The survivors were placed on reservations, which are by another name, concentration camps, before that name or before that term was created. And your culture produced cowboys and Indian mythology. You understand? Cowboy and Indian mythology. And you turned the genocide into entertainment. And you taught it to your children as adventure stories. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. I don't think you even understand. I don't think you even can understand how monstrous this is. And in the 20th century, within living memory, just the last century, the century of your so-called modern post-enlightenment human rights declaring civilization, the West, you produced 2 world wars and killed estimated 90 million people in those 2 world wars combined. The Holocaust, that was nothing but where your character and your instincts intersected with your technology. That's all that was. And Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you vaporized civilian populations in just 2 flashes of light, wiped them out, and until now you rationalize it. The napalming of Vietnam, 3 million Vietnamese dead. 3 million people dead. Agent Orange contaminating the gene pool for generations until now. Then you had in the 1990s the sanctions against Iraq in the 1990s, where the United Nations itself estimated that you killed over 500,000 Iraqi children, and your Secretary of State, so-called, at that time said that the price was worth it. Said it on camera, said it on record. She said it was worth it. Sure, you might disavow what she said, but you don't disavow what she did, because you didn't stop and you don't stop, and you're still doing it until now. And now, right now, you have live streamed in real time a genocide against the people of Gaza. And the truth is you don't care. The truth is you don't care at all. I know you've got your protests. I know you have your marches. You have your online crocodile tears. I see it. But the only thing that you're really upset about, this is the truth. is that you're being confronted with the reality of the complete disconnection between what you say and what you do, between what you tell the world you believe, and what you inflict, the barbarity that you inflict upon the world. You're upset about being exposed. You're upset that the lies about your so-called civilization are being exposed in 4K. It isn't this should not be happening. We shouldn't be doing this. It's we can't be seen doing this. It hurts our credibility. Do you understand? No one in the world believes that you actually believe in the principles that you talk about. No one believes that. Because everyone in the world has experienced the brutal reality of how you really are and what you really believe in. You're literally, you only care about your self-perception between each other because you never cared about how your victims see you. You never cared about our opinion at all. You just don't want to look bad in front of your own people, meaning you don't want you want to keep the facade up so that you can keep telling each other how civilized you are, how advanced you are, how sophisticated you are. It's bad form, to be caught on camera violating every single principle that you all pretend to believe in. It ruins the illusion. It spoils the collective role play. It's a mood killer. No, we're not the same. We are not the same. We are not allies. And Muslims need to understand this. Muslims need to understand this. Just like how a non-Muslim can never understand Islam, a non-Muslim can never understand Islam or understand the Muslim world properly because they will always view it as an outsider. So they will always superimpose their own biased frameworks, their own limited understanding upon whatever they are observing. That's how you get Orientalism. In that same way, Muslims can never really understand the kuffar. That's true. Muslims can never truly understand the kuffar. We're always going to project our values onto you, values that you don't actually have. We're always going to think better of you than you are in reality. Because there are standards of morality that we just presume about human beings. You understand? We can't fathom that there are actually people on this earth who do not, in fact, live up to those bare minimum base level standards. And this has gotten us into trouble many, many times. These assumptions. We've gotten fooled many, many times. We've gotten conned many times. We trusted and we let our guard down and we got ambushed too many times exactly because of this. There are things that your civilization does casually, frivolously, that are the subject of entertainment, subject of dark humor and jokes and light conversation at your dinner tables and whatnot. Things that have been normalized in your society so thoroughly that the people who participate in them feel nothing, feel no shame, register nothing, and move on without a second thought, and no one thinks anything about it. And those same things to us, to people operating from an actual moral framework, to people with a functioning conscience that is calibrated to a divine standard, those same things are monstrosities to us. You understand? It's not cultural differences we're talking about, not value disagreements. We're talking about atrocities. And you don't see it. That's the terrifying part. Not that you do them, not just that you do them, but that you are incapable of seeing how bad it is. The interface is moral looking, but the operative code underneath is something else entirely. And Muslims need to understand this. This keeps you all in a state of constant cognitive dissonance. Just like with your credit cards, like actually in reality, you're poor. You're literally impoverished. That's the reality. That's the reality. But your credit cards let you live the illusion that you're not poor. You can live above your means by way of rollover debt. You're living a life that you cannot actually afford in reality. It's a mirage. You can't afford a car, but you have one. You can't afford groceries, but you've got a full refrigerator. You can't actually afford to eat out, or you can't afford to get takeaway, but you still keep getting food delivered, don't you, anyway? You shop anyway. You buy on Amazon anyway, or TikTok shop anyway. Without your credit cards, you would be begging in the streets. So you understand you are earning one kind of life, but you're living another kind of life by means of debt. Until you actually think that you're middle class. You actually think maybe even that you're upper class, when actually you're supposed to be living in a van down by the river. You understand me? It's the same with your so-called morals. This is what I'm telling you. It's the same with your so-called morals and your so-called principles and values. You want to be able to live the illusion as if you have them, but you do not have them. Your credit cards make it look like you're financially stable when you're not. And your fake moral claims, you can make yourself look like you are civilized and you are decent when you're not. I'm just telling you the reality. Again, as a witness, I think it's horrific. I think it's horrendous what has been done to you, what has been done to your minds, what has been done to your souls as a people. Objectively, it's horrific. And I'm not going to lie about it. I'm not going to lie about it just because you might get offended by being told. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but like I say, I know that that is the basis upon which you decide who is or who is not your ally, who does or does not support you, or who does or does not care about you, not on the basis of truth. So I know that you won't hear me. So let me say something to the Muslims specifically, very important. Because in the Telegram group, in the Middle Nation Telegram group, someone mentioned seeing a Western da'i talking about we have to get past this us and them mentality. He said, you are us and we are you. This is an interfaith dialogue. I'm telling you, that's a treacherous statement he made. That's a treacherous statement. It's an incredibly dangerous and naive fantasy to believe in. And like I said, thinking like that has gotten Muslims into all sorts of problems in the past because we underestimated the danger of the people that we're dealing with. So let's be upfront about this. We're all human beings. Alhamdulillah, we're all human beings. We're all part of the same human family, the children of Nabi Adam alayhi salam, no doubt about that. But we are not the same as them. No, there is an us and there is a them. Both of those things exist. And we can say that without it being a hostile statement. It's not adversarial. We say it as a statement of fact. And we as Muslims, we understand that us and them can coexist. Our history demonstrates that. For centuries, under genuine Islamic governments, non-Muslims lived with documented protections. They lived with legal rights. They lived with functional institutions of their own, and with the freedom to practice their faith and to govern their own communities by their own laws. Yes, we even gave them that, not as a courtesy, but as an obligation, a divine obligation that is written into the architecture of Islamic governance. I mean, until today, subhanAllah, right now, today, there are literally more churches per Christian in the Muslim world than there are even mosques per Muslim in the Muslim world. There's even more churches per Christian in the Muslim world than there are churches per Christian in the West. When Salah ad-Din retook Jerusalem in 1187 after 88 years of Crusader occupation, what did he do? He ransomed the Frankish inhabitants, he negotiated their departure, and he protected the Christians. He protected the Christian and the Jewish holy sites, what they regarded as holy. And he even released the people who couldn't pay their ransom. And when he retook the city, he sent his own physicians to go and tend to the sick among his enemies. This is all documented. This is all historical record. That's how we are. Alhamdulillah, we are a magnanimous people. We are a merciful people. That's us. Contrast that with what happened when the Crusaders, when the Christians took Jerusalem in 1099. You don't have to believe us. The chronicles of the Crusaders themselves, their own accounts, written by themselves in celebration, describe the massacre of the population. Muslims, Jews, and even other Christians, Eastern Christians. They said that the blood was up to the bridles of their horses as they rode it. That's your civilizational comparison. Their own chronicles, that's your own source, okay? That's them. That's them. When Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam entered Mecca, after years of persecution, after years of torture, after years of exile, the murder of his companions, the boycotting of the Muslim community, when he finally entered in full authority with 10,000 Muslims, he issued a general amnesty to all the people who had done all of that to him in the past and to the Muslims in the past. And he didn't do it as a strategy, he did it as a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's your civilizational comparison. That's us. See, for us, we can recognize and we can acknowledge that there is an us and there is a them without that becoming us versus them. You're the ones who made it versus. You insist on making it adversarial. We don't. You insist on making it adversarial, not us. You insist on making it adversarial every time, historically and right now. Your civilization doesn't know how to leave people alone. You don't know how to leave other people alone. You will not stop until we have adopted your way, your epistemology, your values, your frameworks, your definitions. No, assimilation is the price of your tolerance, and it always has been. You don't know how to coexist with difference. You only know how to crush it, how to co-opt it, how to eliminate it. The Quranic injunction, lakum dinukum waliya din, to you your way, to me my way, that's actual tolerance. That's real tolerance. Not inclusion that is contingent upon ideological compliance. I practice my faith, you practice your faith. You govern your community. live according to your values, and I will honor the covenant between us. And if any harm comes to you, we will protect you and we'll take care of you. That's the framework that Islam produced. That's what we live by. What your civilization produced was, we will tolerate you only as long as you become exactly like us. And if you don't, we will demonize you and we will attack you. You and I both know that that's the truth. You're coercive by nature. You're domineering by nature. You don't think that's what it is because you have been the dominant power for long enough that your coercion feels like the natural order of things to you. It doesn't feel like aggression because anyway, you have no moral framework that would even objectively allow you to define anything that you do as wrong. There's a moral void at the center of your civilization, at the center, at the foundational core. And all the things that I was just talking about, the incarceration, the addiction, the loneliness, the child abuse, the sexual abuse, the rape, the industrial scale degradation, that's not a system that's failing. This is what you all need to understand and reconcile your with. That's the system functioning as designed, extracting, consuming, moving on. This represents your culture. The system represents your culture. It's not a violation of your culture. You're a terrifying civilization. You are a terrifying civilization. Terrifying not because you're powerful. Power is morally neutral. It doesn't matter. You are terrifying because you are powerful and morally unmoored. You have some of the most devastating military capacity that's ever been assembled, but you have no genuine, binding internal restraint on how it's to be used. That combination, operating across 5 centuries, has produced a history of global terror and global savagery, such as the world has never seen before. And now you want me to be your ally? You want me to sign on? You want me to join your coalition? Stand with you? Why, who in God's name could ever do that in good conscience? You don't need allies, you need exorcists. That's the truth. You don't need allies, you need exorcists. And you want us to assimilate, you want us to secularize, you want us to modernize, you want us to put the Quran down and pick up your values instead. Are you sure? Are you sure? I don't think you're thinking this through, not even slightly. Listen, Islam is what is protecting you. I'll say it again. Islam is what is protecting you. Our adherence to Islam, our adherence to our religion, to the Quran, to the Sunnah, to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the Islamic frameworks of ethics, the Islamic frameworks and principles of restraint, that's what's keeping you safe from us. After everything that you've done, after the Crusades, after colonization, after Iraq, after Afghanistan, after Palestine, after Somalia, after Syria, on and on and on. After the theft of our resources and the destruction of our civilizations and our institutions and the manufacturing of failed states, after the drone strikes, after the torture programs, after Abu Ghraib, and the ongoing present tense dispossession of our brothers and sisters, and the genocide in Gaza, not to mention your atrocious crimes that you committed against others. And that list, if we went down that list, it's too long to even recite. After all of that, and with full awareness and knowledge about all of that, we're still here. Still operating within the limits set by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and choosing patience and choosing the deen over our feelings. And you want to take us away from that, really? You want us to operate like you? You want us to act on our racial and our ethnic and our nationalistic identities without the moral guidelines of Islam? Do you understand? The Ummah is approximately 2 billion people. That's about 470 times bigger than the population of the United States of America. The entire Western bloc. You're talking about the United States, you're talking about Europe, you're talking about Canada, you're talking about Australia. You combine all of those people, it's maybe around 1.1 billion people. Well, the Muslim world is nearly double that. And these are not people, we're not talking about people with the Muslims who have abstract theoretical grievances. These are people with living memory, you understand me? With parents and grandparents who experienced what was done, who remember what was done. Parents who lost their children because of you. With ongoing present tense wounds, open wounds, real, documented, verified, undeniable wounds, going back for centuries and continuing until right now. I'm telling you, what stands between what we have suffered and vengeance on a catastrophic civilizational scale is nothing but Islam. The Quran and the Sunnah, the divine command to prefer patience, to prioritize stability, to pursue coexistence, to exhaust every alternative, to honor our agreements and to protect the innocent, to restrain our hand even when our hand is justified. Do you understand me? That is what is holding us, not your intelligence agencies, not your counter-extremism programs, your de-radicalization initiatives in your think tanks, your academic departments doing studies on Muslim anger. You know, you're actually out here trying to stop Muslims from following Islam, while Islam is the only thing that's keeping you safe. Wallahi, you had better hope and pray that the Muslims stay on our religion, if you have any sense at all. You can't hold us back, 2 billion strong. No one is scared of your bombs. No one is scared of your drones. No one is scared of your attack helicopters. You've seen that for yourselves. Muslims don't fear death. No, we obey Allah. And that's what's keeping us calm and controlled. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not hold us back, if our commitment to Islam did not hold us back, nothing would. Think it through. If you had any sense whatsoever, you would actually be funding programs to strengthen our Islamic knowledge, not disconnect our people from it. Believe me, you do not want to see 2 billion Muslims acting like you. That's the last thing that you want to see. Alhamdulillah, the iman of ordinary Muslims, the tarbiyah of Islam, the tarbiyah of our deen, our consciousness and cognizance of the inevitability of standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, accountable to a standard that is higher than our own feelings, that is what allows your cities to keep standing. I'm telling you, you have no idea what you are asking for when you ask us to put that down, to let that go. Why, if 2 billion people who have every legitimate grievance that exists or could ever be imagined, if they adopted your ways, if they acted on ethnic ego, nationalistic ego, pure, unrestrained, reactive rage with no divine accountability in their minds, no concept of the prohibited, no obligation to mercy, no obligation and no command to prefer peace, if they acted the way that your civilization acts when it feels wronged, or frankly, even when it doesn't feel wronged and it just wants more stuff, why, what do you think that looks like? How do you think that turns out if we acted like you? Think it through. Your birth rates should tell you something, by the way. Germany is at approximately 1.5 births per woman. Italy is 1.2. Spain is 1.2, all well below the 2.1 replacement that is required to sustain a population. Meanwhile, in the Muslim world, alhamdulillah, with very few exceptions, we remain at or above replacement levels. Listen to me, a society that doesn't produce children is a society of people, listen to me, who have no stake in the future beyond their own lifetimes. Short-term thinking by structural necessity. Immediate gratification is the only rational calculus when you have no future generation who you're building for. That civilization is telling you in demographic language, your civilization is telling you in demographic language exactly what it is. And while your so-called civilization contracts and ages and turns inward, you are simultaneously trying to campaign for 2 billion Muslims to abandon the one framework that produces the restraint, the long-term orientation, the moral architecture, the familial stability, the communal coherence that your civilization, so-called, is visibly losing. You want us secular? You want us westernized? You want us to trade the Quran for your values? I'm telling you. And this is the most sincere and the most honest, well-intentioned thing that I can say to you. You had better be praying that we don't do that. You had better be praying that we don't do that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to try to coexist with you, to try to get along with you, to prefer stability, to prioritize mercy, to try to exhaust every peaceful means, to give people their rights regardless of their faith. These are commands to us, not suggestions, not cultural preferences. These are commands from the creator of the universe, Rabbil Alameen. And that's the only thing, that is the only thing standing between the accumulated weight of 1,000 years of grievances and the civilization that produced it. You understand me? Islam is the single greatest guarantee of your own security. The faith of 2 billion people that commands them towards peace, that commands them to be restrained, even towards those who wrong them. And you are spending considerable energy trying to destroy that. I said before, you are so destructive that you're self-destructive. Alhamdulillah, you will never get us to turn away from Islam, and you will never get us to adopt your ways. And you should be on your knees giving thanks for that fact. So yes, even now, our witness function continues. You understand me? We'll still tell the truth about it when wrong is done to you, even to you. We'll still say and try to tell you and teach you what will genuinely benefit your societies, make your societies better and more just and more humane. Not because we're your allies, but because justice is an obligation in Islam. Because you are our fellow human beings. Because we do want good for you. That's the difference between what we carry and what you carry. You understand me? You can't do this for us. You can't be that way with us. Your civilization structurally cannot produce this quality of impartiality towards the people who you have defined as other. Ours can. Your entire intellectual and institutional infrastructure is built on the assumption of your own centrality and superiority and supremacy. But we can be fair to you, even while knowing exactly what you are and who you are. Can you say the same? No, you cannot. If we had done to you what you have done to us, what do you think you would have done to us by now? Think about what you have done. Think about what you have done without anyone even having done anything to you. You understand me? Imagine if we had done to you what you have done to us, if Africa had done to you what you have done to Africa, if Central and South America had done to you what you did to them, well, you have already acted in the world, subhanAllah. You have already acted in the world like an unholy vengeance upon mankind, even without being provoked. Imagine what you would do if your victims had actually dealt with you the way that you have dealt with your victims, given your nature, given your character, given your penchant for remorseless brutality. Well, I don't think there would even be a world left to live in with how much carnage you would commit on the earth. I mean, how much violence you have done without justification. What if you actually had a justification? Well, listen to me. All of your victims have a justification. The Muslim world, the entire global South has a justification. But you're so primitive, you're so underdeveloped that you actually tell yourself that the only reason we don't take revenge for all your crimes is because you have power and we don't, you see? Because you simply cannot fathom people just being moral, people just being peaceful and dignified and humane and compassionate and merciful. You can't comprehend that. You genuinely believe that people only act with decency when they don't have the power to act savagely. I'm telling you, you actually believe, you think that morality is a function of weakness. No. Nothing is stopping the Muslims. Nothing is stopping Africa. Nothing is stopping Central America. Nothing is stopping South America. Nothing is stopping Asia. Nothing is stopping the entire global South. Nothing is stopping us from acting in a barbaric, uncivilized manner except for the fact that we are not violent and uncivilized barbarians, because we are not the same. There is us and there is them, and we are fundamentally, foundationally, profoundly different. Yes, we bear witness to the crimes that you have committed against us, and we bear witness to the crimes that you have committed against others, and we will even bear witness to the crimes that you commit against each other. Yes, we will speak up for the wronged amongst you, even if they themselves are also guilty of their own wrongs and wrongs against us even. And we will always let you know that wrongdoing itself victimizes the wrongdoer, because you deserve to be better than that. You deserve to actually live according to the values that you declare. You understand me? You deserve to not be a hypocrite. You deserve to be civilized. You deserve to be decent. And you are degrading yourself, and you are harming yourself, and you are humiliating yourself, and you are dishonoring yourself as a human being when you act the way that your society has got you acting. That's a fact. We are not your friends, and we are not your allies. But we're not your enemies either. Wallahi, we want good for you because you are our brothers and sisters in humanity, and because it is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us to deal with you in this way. And how we deal with you is not determined by you. It's not determined by us. How we deal with you is not determined by us. It's not determined by our emotions or by any subjective standard. It's not determined by what we ourselves might think you deserve. We deal with you according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us in terms of tolerance, in terms of patience, and in terms of compassion. And we call your actions according to that same type of objective standard, whether you like it or not, whether we like it or not, whether we like you or not, and whether you like us or not. You understand me? It's not about allyship. It's about alignment or misalignment with the truth. alignment or misalignment with justice, alignment or misalignment with morality, alignment with right or alignment with wrong, alignment with good or alignment with evil. And we're not looking for your approval. We're not looking for your acceptance or for any reward from you or any friendship with you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has called us to be witnesses over mankind, and it is only His acceptance, it is only His approval, and it is only His reward that we're hoping for. See, you'll hear that. I know you'll hear that, and you will reflexively recoil from it. Your instant reaction to that, to this kind of talk, is that it is insincere and self-righteous and holier than thou, or what have you. You should take note of that reaction. That's a programmed reaction. You react that way when you hear words like honor, when you hear words like dignity, or words like truth, or even words like justice. You have a negative reaction because of your culture, because of your society. Your society made those words empty of any meaning. And no one ever even uses those words except to reputationally manipulate you or to extort you and to try to control you. See, your society has emptied out those words of any meaning and filled it with poison instead. So now people automatically cringe when you talk like that, or when you hear anyone talk like that, because everyone thinks that you're posturing. But believe me, there are people in this world who still believe in what those words mean. There are people who believe in honor. There are people who believe in dignity. There are people who believe in truth. There are people who believe in justice, and they're not naive, stupid people. And they're not gullible, simple-minded people. See, you recoil at words like righteous, at words like pious or decent or modest or chaste. Look at the meanings. Look at the concepts. Look at the concepts that your culture has robbed from you. They took away some of the most beautiful and the most noble characteristics of human beings by making you skeptical anytime you hear these types of words being used. You understand me? You learned that whoever talks about these things, they don't mean it. You learn that whoever uses words like this, they must actually themselves be the opposite of what those words mean. And you learn that because in your society, that's true. You only ever hear politicians talk like that, or your priests, or your pastors, or your propagandists. They're the only ones who ever talk about things like this. And it's always performative, and it's always manipulative. And the one who's talking, the one who's using those words, couldn't himself or herself be further away from any of those characteristics. So you learn that these are all empty terms, or even that they're toxic terms. But they mean something to us. They mean something to most people in the world. But your society, look at it, look at yourself, interrogate this, interrogate this. Your society has whittled all human potential and all human value down to machine-like, war-like utility. And morality has no place in that, except as a decoy, except as a banner that you lift over your head when you genocide genuinely moral people. That's the truth. That's the truth. And this applies across the board in your society, across the board. It applies to those at the top, and it applies to those at the bottom. And it even applies to those who were absorbed into that society against their will. Yes, it does. And I'm sorry to tell you that. Wallahi, I'm sorry to tell you that. I take no pleasure whatsoever in saying it. But you know, it's like if you're dealing with an addict, if you're dealing with someone who's on crack or who's on meth or whatever the case may be, at some point, someone has got to tell you you're a crackhead. If you want to be a great singer, if you dream, you know, seeing your name up in lights and being a great famous singer or something like that, but you can't carry a tune, well, at some point, someone's got to tell you, someone's got to have the heart to tell you, you can't sing. At some point in your life, you've got to face the facts of what you are, who you are, how you are, and who and what and how you are not. Reality has to be the red line, do you understand? You got to draw the line at what's actually true. And you all have crossed that line, and you have wandered far, far away from the truth. Yes, the oppressors among you and the oppressed among you. That's a fact. You are all affected. You're all affected and you're all infected by that society. You know, it's like if you're a kindergarten teacher, or you're a preschool teacher, or even if you're a stay-at-home parent of small children, and you're dealing with those little children, those toddlers all day long, you almost lose the ability to carry on adult conversation at some point, you know? Someone's trying to talk to you about the energy transition or something, and you've got the theme song to Blue's Clues playing in your head. You can't concentrate. You want to be able to talk like a grown-up. You wish you could talk like a grown-up. You wish you could have grown-up conversations, but you can't even find the words. Your vocabulary is gone. Your attention span is gone. Your concentration level is fried. Because you're in that society. You understand me? You came up in that society. You are submerged in that society. And that's like being submerged in a vat of acid. I'm telling you, it eats away at you. It doesn't matter if you're at the top or you're at the bottom of the hierarchy. It truly doesn't. It has eaten away at your character. There's no way it can do anything else. You have subsisted your whole life on a diet of empty calories, empty rhetoric, empty moral declarations, your whole life. And it doesn't even matter if you want to be good. You don't even know how. Like I said, this applies to you over there, even if you are amongst those people who have been wronged in that society and who are actively being wronged in that society. The wronged over there are not fundamentally more moral than the ones who have wronged them, and that's the truth. That's the unfortunate truth. Being mistreated or being used and abused in that society does not, in and of itself, make you a moral, righteous person. It just makes you someone who got mistreated and who got used and abused. That's all it makes you. And we will call out that wrong that was done to you. And if we speak up for you, understand, we're not doing it for you. And we're not doing it because we think that you're good. We're not doing it because we are your friends. We're not doing it because we are your allies. We're doing it because it's right. And because it is our duty. So understand, we are never on your side. No matter who you are, we are never on your side. We are only concerned, exclusively concerned, with being on the right side. So like I said, understand what I mean by them or by us and them. Because very often, I've noticed this in the comment section on my videos, people often think that when I talk about them, I just mean so-called white people. People think I'm using Western as a euphemism for white. That's what many so-called minorities in the West think. And usually so-called white people think that by them, when I say them, I'm exclusively referring to the people in power, the rich, the government, the billionaires, and so forth, the elites. Sometimes they want to tell themselves or they want to believe that when I say them or when I say the West, I mean Jews. No, them means them. It means you. Them means you in the West. So-called white people, so-called black people, brown people, rich people, poor people, people at the top and people at the bottom. It means everyone who's coming out of the West. The people who run things and the people who don't run things. The people who are run by those people. Elites and everyone under the elites. You understand me? You know, when I was talking about all those statistics, all of the internal dysfunctions in that society, all of the heinous behaviors that go on in that society, that's not just the elites, that's not just the billionaires, it's not just those in power, that's not just so-called white people. Think about what I'm saying. Try to think through what I'm saying. It's not an indictment of a particular group. This is civilizational. This is cultural. This is systemic. It's across the board. When we talk about the origins of it, okay, when we talk about the origins of it, that's another thing. And I'll talk about so-called white people and so-called whiteness. I'll talk about Europe and so forth. I'll talk about that in a minute. And obviously there is a power structure. There is the power structure in that society, the enforcers of the indoctrination, the enforcers of the programming. But I'm talking about the effects of all of that, not just the ones who are in charge of it, but the impact that it has had on the people. And there isn't a single one of you over there in the West who has not had your natural self mutilated by that culture and by that society that you came up in. It warps the way you think. It warps the way you process information, the way you see the world, the way you see yourself, the way you see others, the way you see life, what you prioritize and how you frame things, the mental options that you see, the way you see morality and so forth. Like I said, it has affected and it has infected all of you. How could it not? I mean, when we talk about psychological decolonization, for example, when we talk about psychological decolonization, we're talking about excavating the indigenous mind from Western programming. And that's talking about people who are living in their own countries outside of the West. So even people in all different parts of the world, people in different parts of the world have been affected and have been infected. So what about the people who actually live over there, live their whole lives over there, in that completely contained and insulated, controlled environment, subjected for generation after generation to myths and propaganda and fairy tale versions of history, subjected to simplification, manipulation, self-justification, rationalization, indoctrination, and stupefaction. Literally, generation after generation. Your grandfather was born and raised and lived his whole life Your father was born and raised and lived his whole life, and you were born and raised, and if you don't do something about it, you're going to live your whole life basically at the bottom. You can think about it this way, at the bottom of a very deep and a very narrow well, a pit, a hole in the ground. And you only see from inside that pit. That's all you know of this world. You never saw the land. You understand? You never saw the trees, the mountains, the rivers, the sea, or anything. But the last generation that lived and died down there, they told you that this is all there is. So you now have a very skewed perspective. You have a very skewed version of reality. How could you not? How's a human being supposed to develop like that, in a situation like that? No, I'm not talking metaphorically. Understand me. I'm not talking metaphorically. When I say indoctrination and I say brainwashing, that is exactly what I mean. I'm not speaking metaphorically. I'm not trying to be dramatic or hyperbolic. I mean that a deliberate and a sustained process has been applied to the population of the United States of America over generations, using every single institution available to produce human beings who cannot think outside of pre-approved set of conclusions. Human beings who do not think like most of the people in the world think. You understand me? Who don't behave like most of the people in the world behave. And whose view of the world has almost nothing whatsoever to do with how this world really is. I mean, what is indoctrination? What is indoctrination actually? It's not just when someone lies to you. You know, someone lies to you and maybe you even know that they're lying. That's just lying. You can deal with that. You can deal with that. No, indoctrination is when someone gives you a false picture of reality and you accept it as reality itself. Not as a perspective or an opinion about reality, as the actual thing, as actual reality. You think that you're looking at the world and you're actually looking at the walls of that narrow pit that you're in. And you think it's the horizon. You understand me? The reason that America is so effective, why this is so effective in America, specifically in America, is because they have more resources, more technology, more reach, and they have more incentive to do this than any other society in human history. It's essential to their whole project. I mean, just look at the machine that's got you trapped. Look at the machine that's got you trapped. The machine that has had your brain, has had your heart, has had your mind trapped your whole life, tightly trapped your whole life. Your life, and like I say, the lives of all of your predecessors. They've had you in a vice grip. I'm telling you, you're just like a lab rat in that country. Yes, just like a lab rat. And they've been running an intergenerational experiment on you, injecting your mind with hallucinatory drugs, mind-altering narcotics, shrinking your cognitive functions little by little by little. Again, generation after generation, watching how you mutate, studying how badly they can deform you, studying how much of your humanity they can graft off of you, how much of your soul they can deflate before you become completely inert. You know how Jeffrey Dahmer, he tried to inject chemicals into the brains of some of his victims because he wanted to see if he could turn them into automatons, turn them into zombie sex slaves. Well, Uncle Sam has been doing that to you. Uncle Sam has been doing that to you. That's right. You're not a population, you're a science project. You're not a nation, you're a psychological experiment to see how much you can take and still be human. I told you that the way you are itself is evidence of what has been done to you. And it has been done systematically. I mean, who owns the information that you receive? Think about that. You know, you go to your phone, you go to your television, you go to your radio, you go to your newspaper, you go online. Where's that information coming from? What's the source of that information? Did you know that it's just 6 companies? 6 companies. In 1983, it was 50 companies. 50 companies controlled most of American media. And that 50 companies, that's already a ludicrously small number. But by the time you got into the 2020s, that number was down to 6, only 6. 6 corporations control about 90% of what 300 million people watch, what they read, what they hear, and what they think about, and what they talk to each other about. 6 corporations. And each one of those corporations is owned by people who have very specific interests. And those interests are not your interests. And those interests determine what you see and what you don't see. Every single day, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, they're determining what you see and what you don't see, and what you think about what you see. The overwhelming majority of you can't speak another language besides English, so you are captive customers, captive consumers to them. consumers of controlled media because you're monolingual. So you can't find out what people outside of your pit, what they're saying, what they're thinking about, how they're talking about the world. Even if you wanted to, you can't, because you can't access them linguistically. And all of those six companies have, those six corporations have overlapping interests. They have the same shareholders. They sit on each other's boards of directors. You understand? They have the same advertisers that they're all trying to keep happy. And this is the thing about advertising. If you don't know, advertising is the main source of income for almost all media. The advertisers. The advertisers are the real customers. You are the product, actually. You're not the one that they're selling to. You're the one that they are selling. They're selling your attention. They're selling your time. They're selling your purchasing decisions. That's the product. That's you. The content is just the delivery device, giving you over to advertisers. That's what they're delivering. That means that the version of reality that you are consuming every day is just a mechanism for luring you into the arms of these corporations, into the arms of these advertisers. You need to reflect on the ramifications of that. Where does news actually come from? When you watch the news and they say, according to official sources, or they say government sources report, or the Defense Department spokesman says such and such, who do you think is speaking to you right now? When you listen to that, who do you think is speaking to you? You understand? The government has entire departments with hundreds of employees with budgets running into the hundreds of millions of dollars, whose only job is to produce the narratives that the media repeats and that you consume and that you absorb. The Pentagon alone spends more money on public relations than most countries spend on their entire military. Okay, that's called state-run media. If anyone else did it, that's what you would call it if anyone else did it. And as far as journalists are concerned, so-called journalists, journalism, by the way, used to be a blue-collar job. Back in the day, journalism was a working-class job. You had low pay, you had long hours, you couldn't take leave, you were on call, you understand? Now journalists are just PR agents. They're marketing professionals. They're part of the power structure. That's a white-collar job now. So they just repeat the story that the power structure gives them because anyway, they're part of the power structure. I mean, increasingly, you'll notice that they always use anonymous sources these days as if that's a valid source. They don't even bother. Their sources nowadays are just a euphemism for their own incentives, for their own interests. They themselves already know what sort of a line they're supposed to be giving you because, as I say, they're part of the power structure now. They're part of the power structure. They have the same incentives as the power structure. So they already know what sort of a story they're supposed to give you. Who needs a source? We don't need a source. I'm telling you, I worked in PR for many years. I worked in PR, I worked in media strategy. I've met and I've known a lot of journalists, and you will never find in your life any people who are less informed, who are less educated, or who are less interested in what's happening around the world. All of the so-called journalists, wallahi, all of the so-called journalists that I ever met are the most empty-headed, vapid, clueless, trifling people and the most indoctrinated people that you'll ever meet. They've got more products in their hair than they got brain cells in their head, I'm telling you. And you're tuning in to them, getting your news from these people, the least informed people on the planet, and they're supposed to be informing you. They're not informing you, they're forming you. You understand me? They're not informing your views, they are forming your views. But the media isn't the only layer. That's just the 24-hour rinse and repeat cycle of the brainwashing, the news. The foundation is education in that country. That's the institution for installing the mythology, the American mythology. You know, that version of America that's taught in school, at every school in that country. You know, the founding fathers. The founding fathers were visionaries of freedom. The conquest of the continent was a big, brave adventure. It was beautiful. It was admirable. The extermination and the displacement of millions and millions of people was called just pioneering. They were brave pioneers. The enslavement of tens of millions of Africans was a, complicated historical chapter. It was maybe a bit of a blotch on our reputation, but eventually it was corrected by how good we really are. And every single war that America has ever fought was a war for liberation, for humanitarian purposes. And every atrocity that they ever committed, if it is ever acknowledged at all, that was a regrettable mistake. And always done with good intentions, always done with the best of intentions. We regret it, but, it's an anomaly. It's something that doesn't really reflect the real values of the country. Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. That's what they're teaching you. George Washington and the cherry tree. I cannot tell a lie. Give me liberty or give me death. The first Thanksgiving. All fabrications. Johnny Appleseed. Do you remember that one? You know, Johnny Appleseed, some happy-go-lucky, big-hearted pioneer sprinkling apple seeds across the post-genocide American West to give all those brave settlers apple trees to eat from. Look at these fairy tales, these fables that they tell you. Do you know that was a real man, by the way? John, I think, Chapman. And he planted apple trees, he did, but for profit. He was a land speculator. You understand? He planted those trees as a way of claiming property. Land of the indigenous people. After they had been ethnically cleansed from that land, he planted trees there, and then he claimed that land, and then he sold it to the settlers for profit. He used the apples to make alcohol. Your history is like if Santa Claus was based on a real person from history, but in real life that person was a home-invading pedophile rapist, and you mythologize him as a jolly old fat man giving presents to kids. That's your history. That's what you do with your history. Or if you turn a baby-eating rat into the Easter Bunny, that's your history. That's how you do. The alchemy of turning blood into Kool-Aid. And then you all drink that Kool-Aid just like that Jim Jones cult, committing mass mental suicide. You're not taught anything about your actual history. You're given a story like if Jack the Ripper was turned into a Disney romantic musical film. I mean, speaking of Disney, have you ever looked into the source material for those films, for those movies? They're grisly. I'm telling you, they're macabre. They're sadistic. But you don't do like normal people would do, you know, shudder and recoil and bury those demented stories as far as possible from the eyes of children. No, you pretty them up. You pretty them up. You make it cute. You put a ribbon on it. You sugarcoat the cyanide. Exactly the same thing that you do with your real history. Exactly the same thing you do with your real history. You have picnics in the shade of lynched bodies. I mean, many of you know that they lie about your history. You know that they lie about your history, the history of your country, and beyond that, in the history of Western so-called civilization. You know that. Like telling you that Athens and Rome invented democracy and what have you. While there were democratic or proto-democratic political systems in India, there were proto-democratic or democratic systems in Turkey, in Carthage, which is modern-day Tunisia. They had that hundreds of years before Athens did. You know, many of you know anyway, that your whole history is a lie. You know that. But you don't think about what that means. You don't think about what it means. Understand, it's like if you married someone who has had extensive cosmetic surgery. I mean, they changed everything. They've changed everything. Everything about their face now is completely unrecognizable. Everything about their face, everything about their body, they literally changed everything, okay? To where now they are completely unrecognizable from how they naturally look, okay? You know that they had procedures. You marry them knowing that they had procedures. You know that they had work done, right? But it doesn't occur to you. It doesn't occur to you that since you don't know what they really look like, since you don't know how they used to look like, you don't know what their natural appearance really is, it doesn't occur to you that you now have no idea whatsoever what your child is going to look like. You understand? If you have a child with someone who has completely changed their appearance beyond recognition from what their genetics, how their genetics made them look like, well, you don't know how their genetics is going to make your child look like. You understand me? But you should at least know, you should know that any child you have with this person is not going to look anything like the version of that person that you've got. You understand me? Well, that child could come out looking any kind of way. There's only so much your genes can do. You know? Well, he's got my eyes, but I have no idea where the rest of that came from. You understand me? Just like genetics. It's just like how genetics are real and have a bearing on reproduction. You understand me? Just like how your cosmetic surgery is not going to change that, it's the same with your history. Your actual history shows you who you are as a people and as a so-called civilization. No matter how much plastic, no matter how much silicone, no matter how much filling or what have you, no matter how much mythology, I'm saying, no matter how much propaganda, no matter how many fables and fairy tales, no matter how much you Disneyfy your history, no, your cultural genetics are what they are, and that is what will be reproduced. Not the cartoon, sculpted, surgically enhanced version of you that you like to tell yourself you really look like. I keep seeing people get angry when they see people online using those AI filters to make themselves look more beautiful, to make themselves look younger or more fit than they are and what have you. But I'm telling you, you have been catfished by your whole history. You were looking up at a picture of white Jesus and you thought it was a mirror. You thought it was a mirror. You have no idea how hideous you really are. You've never seen yourself, how you really look. See, they teach you history. You want to learn history. The reason why you want to learn history, or what you can learn from history, is pattern recognition. And through that pattern recognition, you understand your people or any other people, how they operate, how they behave, how they act, what they believe in, who they are as a people, as a nation, right? So they taught you that Disney-fied history, and they fabricated that fraudulent pattern of virtue and heroism that you think is American history. So you would think that that's what you're like. You would think that that's what you stand for. And they did all of that to cover up the real patterns, the real beliefs, the real behaviors, the real so-called civilization. Because the real history, if you look at the real history, the real pattern is catastrophically consistent for America throughout their history, for the West overall. And that is what it is. It's a pattern of pillage, a pattern of cruelty, a pattern of greed and inhumanity. And every instance that you point out, if you point out an instance of that inhumanity, they'll say it was an anomaly. Well, they've had one anomaly after another without interruption for centuries. That's called a pattern. It's an anomaly if you don't attack someone. It's an anomaly if you don't torture people. It's an anomaly for you if you accidentally, through no fault of your own, completely unintentionally act according to your stated values. That's an anomaly when that happens. Don't get defensive when I tell you that. Don't get defensive. That's not the solution that you have been trained to think it is. Defensiveness, deflection, denial, blame shifting. This is not a solution. That's a trained reflex. You can't disavow all of the evil that your so-called civilization, their barbarism that they have done. You can't disavow that and also at the same time be defensive about it. I'm trying to tell you about the architecture of your confinement. Please understand me. I am not just telling you about how your so-called civilization is. I'm not just telling you about that, how it is, how it always has been. I'm also telling you how it made you this way and how it keeps you this way, how it enforces, how it warps, how it mutilates you. I'm telling you what makes you them instead of us, how it stunts your development as a human being, as a moral human being, an intelligent, coherent, mature human being. I'll tell you again, wrongdoing harms the wrongdoer. It is self-oppression. When I'm telling you all of the horrific ways that you have been as a society or across history, all of the unspeakable things that you have done as a society, and all of the ways that you have lied about that, I'm trying to make you aware of the situation that you are in. Because it's a very dangerous situation. It's a miserable situation. It's a degrading situation. It's a humiliating situation. This is the only life that you have. Do you understand that everything is going to testify about you? Everything, not just everyone, everything. Your limbs, your body, your tongue, even your mind. SubhanAllah, the trees and the stones, all of nature, the earth itself is going to bear witness and testify about you. Don't you know that the earth, the ground that you walk on, the very ground that you walk on feels a kind of way about you? There are people who die, and when they die, the earth is relieved that they're gone because all they ever did on the earth was wickedness. You don't want to be that, do you? You don't want to be that person, do you? I can't believe that you would want to be that. No, that's why they have lied to you. That's why they have dumbed you down. That's why they have impaired your cognitive abilities. That's why they have made you that person while making you think that you're not that person that the earth will feel relieved of when you die. You don't want to be like that. We don't want you to be like that, but your so-called civilization wants you to be like that. Your society wants you to be like that. They want you to be that person, and they have made you that person. Your society, your country, your culture, your so-called civilization is not what you think it is. This is what I'm telling you, and you are not who you think you are. And if you think that I'm being unfair, if you think or you feel attacked by what I'm saying, you are missing the point exactly the way that you have been programmed to miss the point. Scrutinize your reflex responses to what I'm saying because they have been trained into you by that very society that I'm talking about. I'm not just talking to so-called white people right now. Understand me. Don't comfort yourself with that assumption. I'm not just talking about your power structure. I'm not just talking about your elites right now. I'm talking about everyone who has been basting in that toxic chemical spill of a culture. I'll get to white people. I'll get to that. I'll talk about that. Just stay with me. I'll get to that. But right now I'm talking about the system that they made from their culture. They're the origin of that culture. They're the origin of that system. But we have to talk about the system that they made that is keeping you in captivity. You understand? In captivity. You think you've got freedom of speech, for example. You think you've got freedom of speech in America, but that's because you don't have freedom of thought. See, this is what they've done very cleverly, is to not actually suppress speech. They have a pre-built menu of opinions that you're allowed to choose from or to even know about. You understand? And all of the commentators and all the media personalities and all the pundits and all the politicians that you see, look at them very carefully. Look at them very carefully. Notice that not a single one of them, from the conservative to the most progressive, so-called, has ever said anything, not even one time, that has ever legitimately or genuinely threatened the fundamental interests of those people who made them millionaires. Not one. Think about it. You got people on television who are supposed to represent every single point of view that's out there, every perspective that's out there, every voice that's out there. But not a single one of them has ever actually threatened power by anything that they've ever said. Every single one of them is actually made wealthy and made famous by the very powers that they claim to be critiquing and criticizing and condemning. That's not a coincidence. That's curation of a mythology about freedom of speech. I'm telling you about the mechanisms. The first thing that you have to do if you're planning a prison break is to map the facility. You have to map your captivity. Now look at the cultural layer that you're all immersed in, because that's when it gets even deeper, because the media can tell you what to think about current events, how to interpret current events and so forth. Education can give you the false history. But the culture, entertainment, movies, music, sports, and so on, that tells you what to value, what to aspire to, what's normal, what's abnormal, how to talk, how to act, how to dress, what kind of personality you should have, right? What kind of attitude you should have, how you should come across. You're given a selection, just like the narrative shelf. There's a cultural shelf, an identity shelf. So choose one, choose an identity. Be like this actor, be like this performer, be like this even fictional movie character. Try to talk like the people in this sitcom, the sitcom dialogue. Imitate, replicate, and substitute your own individuality with some sort of a personality brand that has tested well with audiences. This is what you do. And this is the deepest level of programming, because you don't experience it as programming. It's not overt. You experience it as enjoyment. You experience it as entertainment. I mean, really, there's too much to talk about in terms of all of the ways that your culture undermines your mind, undermines your thinking, undermines and controls the way that you understand and the way that you interact with the world. There's really too much to say. And this happens to everyone in that society. Like I said, everyone in that society, no one is immune. Not a single person is immune. You have the general layer of cultural programming. You have the day-to-day propagandization of the news. You have the education system and the false history. And then there's the mass media and the entertainment, all coordinating together to mold you and to shape the way that you think and the way that you feel and the way that you act. And this lands on everyone. I mean, like I said, you do have to make a distinction in terms of the managers of the system and the products of the system, which is you. Like I say, that's you. You're the products of the system. In terms of, culpability to one extent or another, arguably there is a different level of culpability between the producers and the products. And you have to make a distinction with regards to the origins of the system, the origins of the culture, and the current maintainers and perpetrators or perpetuators of the culture. Perpetrators is the right word too. But everyone thinks that when I talk about Western predation, I'm only talking about so-called white people, because it is a European mentality in origin. But every American, every single American, regardless of their so-called race, regardless of their so-called ethnicity or their cultural origin, every American has adopted or has been molded into that same mentality to one degree or another. So like I say, there's the general programming, and that's society-wide, that's societal-wide, and then there's the curated programming for specific demographic groups in the country, because obviously racial and ethnic compartmentalization is itself an obligatory structural element in how that country is organized. Again, because of the European origin, because of the so-called white origin. They will always instrumentalize some sort of racial or ethnic rationale for how and why you specifically are eligible for exploitation and oppression, because dehumanization gives them a license for that. See? The importance of so-called race, the importance of so-called ethnicity itself in America, in the West, is a product of that dehumanizing compartmentalization system. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us that humankind was diversified into tribes and nations and different skin tones and different languages and so forth, all across the earth, as a way for us to know each other. That's what we're taught, to know each other. In other words, so that we can know what actually matters about a person, which is their goodness, which is their character, which is their piety, and not what doesn't matter about a person. But you in the West, you inverted that lesson. The truth is that what Martin Luther King dreamed about in that famous speech, his dream, was the Muslim Ummah. He just didn't know it. So you hate and you discriminate and you compartmentalize in the West, in America, on the basis of so-called race and on the basis of so-called ethnicity, and then the response is to develop racial and ethnic pride, which consolidates that compartmentalization and further minimizes the genuine basis for determining human value, which is piety and character. It's a self-reinforcing system. It's ingenious in a way. Evil genius. And you can't say, well, I don't see race, I don't see color, and you all should stop thinking in these terms, in racial terms, when the only ones who are supposed to do, or who are expected to do that, are the so-called races that are being hated and being discriminated against. That doesn't work. You understand? It can maybe work on a one-on-one basis to one extent or another between individuals, but not on a societal level. Not when that society itself is organized in racial hierarchy. That doesn't work at all. It's all well and good for an African American or a Latino American or an Asian American or an Arab or what have you. It's all well and good for them to say, well, I don't see race. But the power structure sees race and categorizes by ethnicity, and it deals with people on that basis. So if a so-called black person says that they don't think of themselves in racial terms, all they're actually doing is helping to obscure the real foundational and fundamental racism that governs the society that they live in. And they're just helping to perpetuate the fantasy that that is not the case. You're helping to exonerate the society of real ongoing racial bias. So by your system, you actually force everyone to emphasize the importance of what the society deems important, no matter how actually superficial it is. And of course, because your society, in reality, does treat this as important, this superficial thing as important, and it judges, and it compartmentalizes, and it treats people according to these superficial features like skin color, obviously, these people have been and are treated differently and have a very different experience in that society. That's a reality. And you, therefore, made the insignificant thing significant in real terms. You did that. So you cannot now say, suddenly, I don't see race, I don't believe in race, without nullifying the lived experience of millions of people. And then if they don't agree to that nullification of their experience, you shift the blame or you shift the responsibility of racialized thinking onto them. And you see this all the time with you people saying, why do black people always make things about race? Why can't they move on? Why are they always using the race card and so forth? No, that society relentlessly racializes people, and it always has. And when that gets pointed out, you accuse the one who pointed it out of being obsessed with race. But I digress. So culturally, you are programmed by your entertainment, by your films, by your television programs, by your music, and so forth. I've talked before about the fact that Hollywood keeps making the same horror story over and over again. How almost every single movie is, in fact, a horror film. How every protagonist is nothing but a killing machine in all of your films. How your villains and your heroes are morally and practically indistinguishable from another except by means of the plot. Both are always deadly. Both are always vicious. Both are always ruthless murderers. Violence is always worshipped in your cinema. But there's another element to that. It's always a story about how the exceptional individual saves the world. The American comes in from outside and he fixes everything, most often through brute force, most often through violence. The lone hero who does not need the community. He doesn't need the collective. He doesn't need the population, the people. He doesn't need anyone but himself and his courage and his guns and his righteous anger. That's your story. That's the story you tell a million times, every single time. You know, just like the classic Western film, that classic Western movie where the oppressed townspeople need, I don't know, Clint Eastwood to come in and save the town from some oppressive landowner or rancher or what have you. Like a whole town can't do what one man with a gun can do who's willing to kill. See, I'm saying it trains you to look for a savior rather than to organize. It trains you to worship individual greatness rather than build collective power. It teaches you that the masses, people like you and I, are just for the background. They're extras in the scene. They exist to be rescued or to be collateral damage. They don't make history. The special one makes history. And your job is only to cheer for him. And usually the only thing that makes him special is just that he's a highly skilled and efficient killer. And then you look at the American political culture and you wonder why people keep waiting for the next Messiah president to come and fix everything. You still believe like that. You've been trained to think like that. You wonder why every 4 years people work themselves up into a frenzy of hope over one or another politician who will inevitably disappoint them. It's because they were trained for exactly that response. The cultural operating system tells them, wait for the hero, wait for Neo, wait for the chosen one, wait for Superman. In other words, it teaches you to be passive. It teaches you to be docile, while at the same time forever worshiping raw power. So you see, they set up your whole understanding of the world like this. They set up your whole understanding of the world like this, with this kind of a framework, and they turn the whole world, as you understand it, into an old Hollywood Western. Because they've already trained you on how to play your role in that kind of a story. So you invent the story of some villain and you're the hero, or your country is the hero, and you are the helpless townspeople watching the gunfight, rooting for Clint Eastwood because he's the killer who's on our side. He's killing for us. So for most of the 20th century, the villain in that story was communism. Then it was terrorism. It was Muslims. It was Arabs. Then it's immigrants. And of course, throughout that whole period of time, throughout the entirety of American history, you utilized racial compartmentalization to demonize African Americans. Now it's just kind of a rotating cast of internal and external threats that keep the population's anxiety at a heightened state and directed at, Muslims, at China, at Russia, at migrants at the border and so forth. Directed there rather than upwards at the class of people who are actually determining the conditions of their lives. This is how they're training you and how they've been training you. It doesn't matter what the target is. The function is the target. The target exists so that you never look at who's picking the target for you and why they're picking that target and what they benefit from your attention being there instead of somewhere else. And all this time, you yourselves, even while you are being exploited, and I don't deny that you are, and even while you're being oppressed, and I don't deny that you are, even while you're being controlled, and even while you're being manipulated, and even while you are being negated, which I don't deny that you are, you yourselves are also not acting right. Like I said, look, there is the origin of the system, the origin of the culture, which I will talk about, the enforcers of that, the managers of that, which I will talk about. But then there's also all of you, and you are the products of that. And it's a shoddy product by any metric. And you ought to resent that. You ought to resent that. You ought to be perturbed by that because they made you less and they made you worse than you should be. Worse and less than you deserve to be as human beings. Because after you run this type of a program on a population for 250 years, you don't just get misinformed people. You get a particular kind of a person. A very recognizable type of a person. You get a person whose entire relationship to reality is defensive and adversarial, who doesn't want to get to know things that contradict their self-image, who experiences truth about their society as an attack on themselves personally. You understand? And who has no functional historical memory. Not because they're incapable of it, but because the whole apparatus that they live inside of has worked against that memory from their first day of school, if not from before. You get a person who is genuinely, deeply convinced that their opinions are actually their own, that they thought about the world and they arrived at these conclusions through their own reasoning, when actually the conclusions were installed before they were even old enough to question the conclusions or even ask the questions that the conclusions are supposedly the answer to. You understand me? You think that your ideas or your opinions are your own, then you explain to me why I already know what your opinion is. why I already know what your ideas are, when I already know what your perspective is going to be. If I just take a little bit of information from you, I can already write the script that you're going to recite to me in any conversation. Am I a mind reader? No, I just know the scripts. Because there's only a few dozen, maybe half a dozen scripts that you all use. See, an ignorant person is someone who doesn't know something. That can be fixed. They can be taught. They can learn. But a person who legitimately and genuinely believes something false is actually much, much harder to reach because they think they already know. So they're immune to new information because the new information contradicts what they already know. And what they already know feels like reality itself because everything that they have been told, everything that has been installed in them, is reinforced continuously by the culture, by the society, by the media, by the education system, by the news, by every institution that I've been talking about. It's all reinforced. So they won't accept anything that contradicts that, not to mention the fact that the conclusions and the ideas and the opinions and the so-called information that they are relying upon for how they feel, the way that makes them feel is comfortable with themselves. It makes them feel good about themselves. It makes them feel exceptional, American exceptionalism. It makes them feel special. So if you tell them anything that contradicts that, well, that hurts their whole self-image. So they'll reject that. They have a personal, vested interest in rejecting any information that's going to make them feel bad, no matter how true it is. So they're immune to new information. They're immune to new information. They've been inoculated by the system against any new information, which usually means true information. This is why you can show an American the data. You can show them the numbers. You can show them the statistics. You can show them the reality of their history. You can show them the documented record of everything that their government has done, everything that their country has done in their name with their taxes. And very often nothing changes because the data is not the problem. The operating system is the problem. The lack of information isn't the problem. They don't have a processor for that information. The framework that determines what counts as believable and what doesn't count as believable. That's the problem. And that framework was installed before they even knew what a framework was. That's why normal people from around the world simply cannot engage with you in any sort of a useful way. And I've talked about that before. When anyone outside of America talks to an American, wallahi, it's like talking to someone in a cult. Again, any American, so-called white, black, brown, whatever the case may be, rich, poor, it doesn't matter. It's like talking to an AI or something. You were trained on a very specific data set with very rigid parameters and rigid guardrails, and you simply cannot engage outside of your programming. And so what you get is what you've got in America right now. The largest wealth gap in the world, in the developed world, the largest prison population on earth by raw numbers and per capita, the only wealthy nation in the world without universal health care, tens of millions of people in dire poverty in the richest country that has ever existed, a crumbling physical infrastructure, roads, bridges, and so forth, declining life expectancy, epidemic levels of drug addiction, depression, suicide, mental illness, psychological disorders, a whole generation that cannot afford the things that their parents took for granted. And the system's answer to all of this is to tell all of those people, all of the people who are suffering in that way in their country, that it's their own fault. And you believe them. You embrace the grind culture, the side hustle culture. Get up at 4 a.m. and try harder. You mock so-called brokies. You yourself are drowning in debt just to keep a roof over your head, just maybe 1 or 2 paychecks away from homelessness, and talking about what do you bring to the table. You're under the table. What are you talking about? No, anyone suffering in that country just didn't work hard enough. You just didn't work hard enough. You just didn't make the right decisions. You made bad decisions. Or others are to blame. Immigrants are to blame. So-called minorities are to blame. Foreign countries are to blame. Iran is to blame. But never, never, ever the class of people who has actually been extracting wealth from you for generations and using a media system, using an education system, using a cultural system to make sure that you would never figure out what's actually happening. The genius of it, I said it's genius. The same way that you would describe a particularly well-designed trap, it is genius. The real genius is that it is self-maintaining and self-reinforcing. Once it is installed, it reproduces itself. You know, children enter the school, they get the mythology, they watch the movies, they listen to the music, they absorb the values. They become what you want them to become. They enter the economy, they internalize the incentives of the economy. Then they have children, less and less than they used to, and then they pass that mythology down to their children. This is the system doesn't even actually have to actively propagandize each generation from scratch. Each generation propagandizes the next one because the previous generation believed it, the same way that many of you still believe it now. 250 years of this. And this is the product. Like I say, you're the product, and it's a shoddy product. It's a third-rate product. It's a faulty product. It's an inferior product because it was designed to be an inferior product. Like I keep saying, I'm not telling you this to offend you. I'm not telling you this to hurt your feelings. And I know that you want to think of yourself as an exception to everything that I'm saying. You want to tell yourself that none of what I'm saying applies to you, especially if you're a so-called minority in that country. You want to believe that what I'm saying only applies to so-called white people. Or you want to believe, if you're white, you want to believe that what I'm saying only applies to the rich and powerful. Well, that's like thinking that the person who spills a toxic chemical is the only one who's going to get sick from that toxic chemical. The one who pulled you into the pit is not the only one in the pit. Not anymore. And you've been down in it now for generations. And that's why there is an us, and that's why there is a them. You understand me? The same way that people who live their whole lives on solid ground are not going to be the same as people who live their whole lives down at the bottom of a well. You don't think like us. You don't. You don't think like us. You don't act like us. You don't feel like us. You don't see the world like us. You live and think and operate according to a very strange and very specific and very narrow context. Your normal is abnormal to us. What shocks us, you shrug it off. What has been done to you is tragic, but it has been done. And the effects of it are undeniable, and the effects of it are very observable. You know, I saw someone, a so-called white man, online talking about, yes, I understand that you reap what you sow. But I didn't sow any of this, and yet I still have to reap it. And he was talking about the consequences, specifically of the Iran war and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This is what he was talking about, the economic consequences, the high fuel prices, the high food prices, the inflation, and so on. Saying, I didn't sow this, so why should I have to reap it? This is unfair. But you didn't feel that way when you were reaping the benefits. You were very happy to reap the benefits of low prices off the backs of sweatshops in the global south, reap the benefits of child labor, reap the benefits of conflict minerals from the Congo, reap the benefits of the material lifestyle that has been enabled by colonization, by exploitation, by slavery, by war, and by carnage, and by occupation, by economic coercion. You reaped all of those benefits your whole life. You reap the benefits your whole life of American exceptionalism, American lawlessness. Well, that was you sowing. Your reaping was you sowing. You understand me? But you see, this is what I mean. This mentality, this mindset, this thinking process that cannot compute anything that I'm saying right now. So, okay, let's talk about white people, because there is no question that they are the origin. That the mentality that I'm talking about originates with those people from Europe. So let's talk about it. Okay, so where do we start? Where do we start? I suppose the first thing that you have to do is actually relocate the conversation about so-called white people into some semblance of reality. And see, this is what you always have to do, subhanAllah. This is what you always have to do with Americans and with Westerners generally. You always have to state the obvious. They make you state the obvious. There's no way whatsoever to talk about anything within their frameworks. Within their frameworks, you can't talk about anything because the starting point of all of their discussions always is far off from anything like reality, anything even resembling reality. They start from a point of hallucination. They start from a point of fiction. They start from a point of fantasy. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting because they've got you always having to argue your way back to the obvious. You always have to argue your way back. There's never been a people, subhanAllah, in history that I know of that is so contentious about basic factual reality. They waste everybody's time and they derail any intellectual or any serious discussion always by just the continuous litigation of things that are actually common knowledge. The litigation of things that are actually common sense. self-evident truth. This is part of what I mean about why no normal people in the world can ever usefully engage with Americans or with Westerners generally. You can't. Because you enter every single interaction, Westerners, you enter every single interaction by insulting our intelligence. I've said this before. This is one of the things that you really need to know about them. This is something that you really must know about Americans and about Westerners. Every interaction is always and only used by them as an opportunity to validate themselves and validate their fabricated frameworks. This is literally the only thing that they're interested in, always, at all times. This is why you hear me using the caveat or using the qualifier so-called so many times when I talk. So-called civilization, so-called white, so-called black, so-called race, so-called enlightenment, and what have you. Because none of these things are real things. These are all things that are just elements in their frameworks. And those frameworks are intended to obscure reality. They're false claims. You understand? So whenever I use those terms, or whenever I refer to those things, I always try to remember to add that qualifier or add that caveat. Because we do have to try to anchor our conversation as much as possible in actual reality. And that includes denying the reality of their unreality, because they always occupy an intellectual position of unreality on every single issue. The so-called rational, so-called reasoning, scientific method following West. So we have to start with the reality. We have to start with the reality. And even with that, there are layers. There are layers in this reality, okay? So there's no such thing as white people. Physically, I'm saying. Physically. You know, I remember reading the transcripts of Stephen Biko's trial, and no one said it better than him. White people, physically, are generally pink more than anything else, or beige maybe. So-called black people are just different shades of brown. I mean, I know it might seem pedantic or what have you to mention something like this. It might seem petty to mention this, but again, let's try to bring things back to reality. Actual black and actual white, black and white are opposites. So there's an embedded implication when you talk about people being white and black. You understand me? So again, I mean, I'm sorry, but this is what I mean. This is exactly what I mean. Their frameworks are layer upon layer upon layer of dishonesty and unreality. I wouldn't have to pick apart so much if there wasn't so much to pick apart. You understand me? So physically, white is not a real category. Humans don't come in these colors. We're not birds or something. Cats or dogs or what have you. Human beings don't come in those colors. So let's dispense with that false construction from the outstart. It's moronic. And it only exists for political and economic reasons. For ideological functions in service to political and economic reasons. Now again, I'll repeat, because you did invent these categories and this method of compartmentalization and discrimination, and because your society actively treats people according to these categories, so-called black and so-called white, they exist as real things in these terms. Because you act like any of this is real, because you act like it's real, so now you have created very different experiences for people, which means different histories for people, different communities, different identities, and so forth, all on the basis of your fabricated categories. So we have to make that distinction. In reality, in actual reality, so-called black and so-called white do not exist among humankind. But because you treat them like they do, because you classify human beings this way, now you force this to become an experiential reality for people. You understand? Now it is an experience that people have in this world, have in their lives, in their minds, in their psyches, in their identities, all based on a completely warped and entirely unjustifiable framework. See, you created this problem for mankind. You created this problem for mankind. Because before you created this problem, people just came from different places. People just had different physical characteristics. People had different backgrounds, different heritage, different lineage, different cultures, and so forth. Different languages, different customs, different practices, different beliefs, and what have you. And human beings all around the world just acknowledge the obvious reality that people who come from different places and come from different environments and come from different climates, they have their own qualities. And generally speaking, it was inconsequential to most people how people looked. That wasn't considered a particularly interesting aspect of any qawm, of any folk, of any nation, of any people. I mean, do you understand, as a so-called racial category, as an identity, as a thing that means something, that's supposed to mean something about who you are and about who you're supposed to be loyal to and about what group you belong to, the so-called concept of whiteness is only about 350, 400 years old. That's it. That's the whole lifespan of this supposedly fundamental, self-evident category of human beings. 350 years, maybe 400 years or so. I mean, in the full scope, in the full sweep of recorded human history, that's nothing. I mean, yes, of course, like I said, people would notice lighter or darker complexion. They would notice that for as far back as people had lighter or darker complexion and eyes to see it with. But it wasn't a source of identity. It wasn't a source of categorization or a reason for categorization. And certainly not anything hierarchical. It was not a racial, so-called racial concept. Like there was no pan-European white race or something. That didn't exist. It was just an incidental feature, a superficial feature, believed by most people to be climate-related or location-related or so forth. See, you didn't even come up with this foolishness until your so-called enlightenment. That's when you came up with this foolishness, when you got enlightened. You had this racial epiphany, and it just happened to coincide with colonization and the transatlantic slave trade. What a coincidence. Before that, Europeans didn't think of themselves as white. Not once, not ever. The English thought of themselves as English. The Irish thought of themselves as Irish. The Germans thought of themselves as German, and the French thought of themselves as French, and so forth. There was no white brotherhood, no shared white culture. They despised each other. They detested each other. Genuinely, deeply, violently, generationally, they despised each other. There was no such thing as pan-European solidarity. There was no white fraternity. That never existed in history. There was centuries upon centuries of tribal hatred, border raiding, religious slaughter, dynastic warfare, and the systematic exploitation of every neighboring group whenever the opportunity presented itself. The 100 Years' War, that was England and France on and off for over a century, for 100 years. The 30 Years' War, it was so the 30 Years' War was so destructive that it killed somewhere between 25% to 40% of the entire population of Germany, what's now Germany. Europeans doing that to other Europeans, so-called white people doing that to other so-called white people. The War of the Roses, butchering each other for a crown, for the throne. The English occupation of Ireland. That happened centuries before they ever went to Africa or anywhere else. With the same logic of extraction and displacement and engineered famine, they perfected that on the Irish people, white people, so-called. White people being colonized by so-called white people. There's your Aryan brotherhood. So let's get clear. Let's get clear on what Europe actually was before the concept of whiteness was invented. Because it is a completely invented concept. For most of recorded European history, the overwhelming majority of Europeans lived in abysmal squalor. Absolutely abysmal squalor. You can't imagine the conditions. You would recognize it today as extreme poverty if it even exists anywhere today. I'm talking about a level of destitution that's difficult to comprehend from a modern point of view, from a modern vantage point. Medieval European peasants, and peasants was most of them, the vast majority, about 4 out of every 5 people was a peasant, they lived in a one-room hut. Dirt floors. They shared it with their livestock, literally. Their animals slept in the same space that they slept in for warmth, sleeping with your goats and sleeping with your pigs. That's your history. The average life expectancy at birth was in the mid-30s. Half of all children died before the age of 5. 1 in 5 women died in childbirth. Famine was absolutely common. It was routine. The Great Famine of the early 14th century killed 10 to 15% of all of Europe's entire population. Then the Black Death came, the bubonic plague. And that took out another third, or some say up to a half of the population of Europe. This are the conditions that they came from. So understand the real history of the people that we're talking about here. Okay? There was never in history some kind of block of so-called white unity or white fraternity. Nobody ever thought like that. Nobody had anything even remotely like that in their minds. And during all that time, by the way, the church, your church, they owned up to a third of all the land in Europe. The aristocracy owned almost everything else. And the peasants worked the land. They couldn't leave the land. They had to pay tithes to the church. They had to pay taxes to the feudal lord. They couldn't leave the land. They couldn't even get married without permission. They were literally legally bound to the soil, not metaphorically, legally bound. You were a serf. You were a serf. You came with the property. You understand? You came with the property. If the land was sold, you were sold with it. That's your history. You weren't human beings. You were farm tools. You were instruments. Instruments for other people who you would later classify as white, but who did not see you and who did not treat you in any way whatsoever as equals. They didn't even treat you as human beings. They didn't treat you as people. White on white subjugation, white on white predation. That's the history of Europe. That's the history of Europe. White on white violence, white on white war, conflict, and strife. And if you're paying attention, that's Europe's future too. That's their future too. That's where they're going. And if you're paying attention, you'll notice that not much at all has changed. Even after they started calling themselves so-called white instead of calling themselves English, or calling themselves white instead of French or German or what have you. The same system is essentially what you have right now in America. That's the feudal system. Europe's great civilizational achievement, the feudal system, before they went out and colonized everyone else. And that's still what you have today. In fact, it's the only organizational approach that you have to your societies, centuries later. Now, I've talked before about how in Europe, across Europe, before Christianity, these people were pagans. They worshiped the jinn. They had relationships with the jinn, with the shayateen. That's not me saying so. This is the historical record. This is the historical record. The Germanic tribes, Odin, Thor, they had blood sacrifices. Yes, blood sacrifices. They did that. They did animals mostly, but they also did human sacrifices, and that is documented. They sacrificed human beings. The Norse people too. Seasonal ritual offerings, that included humans. The Vikings or whatnot. We all know they used to hurl old people off of the mountaintops. When they got too old, they'd throw them off a cliff. You had the Druids among the Celtic people. They had these large wicker structures into which they would put human beings, and they would set them on fire, burn them alive as offerings. Oh, these were brutal people. The devils that they worshiped commanded them to do all sorts of heinous things. This is the history. The days of the week in English still carry the names of their pagan gods, their Germanic false gods. Wednesday is Woden's day. Thursday is Thor's day for Thor. Friday is Frigg's day. Saturday is the Saturn, the day for Saturn. Your calendar is an artifact of your mushrik satanic history. You can't deny it. And Christianity, when it came to Europe, it did not actually displace any of this. It adapted to it, or rather it got adapted by it. European Christianity is very foreign to what they practice in the region where Nabi Isa, where Prophet Jesus actually lived. I mean, calling their religion Christianity is like saying that Pat Boone's version of Little Richard songs sounds the same. You still had idol worship. You still had polytheism, praying to Mary, praying to saints and whatnot. Your pagan festivals got Christian names. Your pagan sacred sites got churches built on top of them. And the folk traditions, the charms, the hexes, the magical beliefs, the nature worship and whatnot, all of this persisted for centuries underneath the official religion. And in fact, they still do persist. You have to take note of that. It's very important to take note of that. I told you before, people talk about China, people talk about India or Egypt or what have you, but Europe probably has the longest continuous congruent culture on the earth. They have been incredibly resistant to changing or developing. It's astonishing. Whatever comes to them becomes like them, or else they'll fight tooth and nail against it. This is a culture that cannot be reformed. It cannot be reformed. It can only be papered over. That's all they've ever done. They rebrand, but they don't change. There's only ever been cosmetic changes to that culture. And this is extremely important for you to understand, because it's a serious mistake to think that so-called Western civilization is a modern thing. People think of it like that. People think of it like that, as if Europeans just suddenly sprang forth as a totally changed people after the Dark Ages. They sprang forth as these great enlightened, rational, scientific, humanitarian thinkers or something out of nowhere. They like to partition their history like that. They like to partition their history. There was the before and there's the after. That's this sort of partitioning. That was then, this is now. Let's not talk about the then. But no, understand, this is an ancient people. This is an ancient people, and they are more resistant to change and more resistant to reform and rehabilitation than any other people on the face of this earth. You think industrialization changed them? Like, as soon as they got machines and as soon as they got gunpowder, somehow that caused a sudden, rapid maturation process, a refinement and advancement in their character? No, not at all. You know how like the West, the term the West is synonymous with modernity, as if some highly advanced, intelligent life forms, some extraterrestrial life forms landed in Europe in the 1800s, and they have no other history before that. No, this is a people, the European people, this is a people who are ancient and whose ways and whose culture has remained absolutely consistent for the last 10,000 years. I'm telling you, things that they were doing and ways that they were acting 10,000 years ago, they were doing those same things 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, 10 years ago, and this morning. They're pre-modern in the modern age. It's 2026, but they're still prehistoric. I'm telling you, in their minds. So you understand, I'm talking about the origins of the culture, the origins of the system that you're all in over there in America right now. The origins and the originators. And that's the culture and that's the system that all of you have absorbed, that all of you have been affected and infected by. No matter where you sit in the social and economic hierarchy of that country, it doesn't matter. Yes, it doesn't matter. You're seeing the world through a prehistoric lens. And it's not even the lens of your own original culture, the original lens of your own actual people. If you're a so-called minority in America, a member of the global majority in America, that lens has been grafted onto your perspective. Now you can't even see through your own natural eyes anymore. You only see through their eyes. See, everything that Europe was about for the last 10 millennia, they brought that over to America when they started that mess. Except that they honed it, they streamlined it, they whittled it down to its core base components. America is the concentrated version. And with every single year, every passing year, they get more and more down to the bone about it. They get more and more down to the bone. They whittle it more down. I'm telling you that they're going more and more back to the original version, the 10,000 years ago version. And you know that occult tradition I was talking about with the jinn worship in Europe, that didn't die out with so-called modernity and the Industrial Revolution and whatever, the Satanism, the jinn worship and what have you. No, it went covert. It went covert and then it re-emerged in like the 18th century and 19th century. Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, the Hermetic Order, Aleister Crowley, Theosophy. I've talked about that before. This is all European. All emerging from what their scholars call the Western esoteric tradition, which is nothing but a continuous thread running from pre-Christian paganism through the Renaissance to the occult revival into the modern secret societies that were behind, or that shaped anyway, the founding of America itself. I mean, you know that the founding fathers were not what you would call Orthodox or normal Christians. Many of them were so-called deists. A significant number of them were Freemasons. Washington was, Franklin was, Hamilton was, and so forth. Okay, so that's your founding spiritual heritage. Again, these are just historical facts. This is just for the record and from the record. This is the background. This is the genealogy of your society. You know, what I talked about before, when someone online is wearing filters, or someone has had extensive cosmetic surgery done to try to make themselves look more beautiful than they really are, than they are naturally. Well, there are two underlying elements to that, or maybe three, motives, I mean, not elements, motives. One is a sense of inadequacy, and the other is envy. And the third motive is that old predatory motive, you know, the filter as camouflage, as a hunting strategy. Look like what you're not, because if you look like what you are, you won't be able to get close to your prey. So you have to change your appearance and make yourself prettier. So the envy is real, the civilizational envy is real, and the sense of inadequacy is real. The European Renaissance, so-called, they'll tell you that that was the great sort of spontaneous flowering of great Western genius. But no, the Renaissance was a copy and paste project. That was copy and paste. Arabic texts were translated into Latin in Toledo and in Sicily. The Islamic world had preserved and had corrected and had improved Greek philosophy, medicine, mathematics, and astronomy, while the Europeans were in what they called their Dark Ages, while they were still in their Dark Ages. They called it the Dark Ages because Europe was dark. The rest of the world wasn't dark. Baghdad wasn't dark. They had the House of Wisdom that was producing brilliant scholars, one after another. Cordoba was the most literate city in all of Europe because of us. We made it that, with libraries that dwarfed anything available in the rest of the continent, in Europe or in France, in UK, what have you. While they were still defecating where they stood, their aristocrats were defecating where they stood. Their peasants were dying of disease and being told by their priests that the earth was the center of the universe. We gave you algebra. Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine was the standard medical textbook in European universities all the way up until the 17th century. The numerals that you use, the Arabic numerals, they're Arabic numerals. And that came to you through the Islamic world from India. The concept of zero, without which your entire computational civilization is impossible. That came by that same route. The navigational tools that enabled European exploration, the astrolabe, and so forth, improvements to the compass and so on, all of that came from us. All of that came from the Muslim world, from the Islamic world, and you took it. Paper came from China, also through the Islamic world to Europe. And then you used that paper to write your claims of civilizational superiority. And then after having absorbed all of this information that we provided to you, after you translated it, after you adapted it, and in most cases you did not credit the source of it, Europe then got to proclaim itself as the summit, the pinnacle of human achievement. The Athens miracle, the Greek miracle, Western tradition, which later became great white tradition, all rising up from the brilliant philosophers of Athens. The irony is that when you came up with the concept of whiteness, Greeks themselves weren't even included as white. You know, you talk about Rome, but you didn't even consider Italians as white either. Yes, you didn't even think of the people who you now hail as the originators of white Western civilization, the Athenians and the Romans. You didn't even consider those people as white. See, this is another layer of the unreality in your frameworks. The precise origin of the racial concept is documented. We know Bacon's Rebellion in Virginia in 1676, black and white indentured servants, both of them indentured servants, enslaved Africans and poor European workers, united in an armed uprising against the planter class. They burned down Jamestown. They terrified the colonial elite because what they demonstrated was that class was more real to these people than the color line. Poor Europeans and enslaved Africans had more in common with each other than they had in common with the people at the top, than they had with the plantation owners. So the elite manufactured a solution. They created race. And within 30 years of the Bacon's Revolution or Rebellion, Virginia had passed the slave codes of 1705, legally defining who was white and what whites were entitled to, and what Africans could be subjected to. For the first time in legal history, white appeared as a formal category with attached privileges. In exchange for those privileges, they were conscripted into the enforcement of the racial order. That's what whiteness is. That's what whiteness is at its origin. It's not a biological fact, obviously. It's not even a cultural heritage. It's a loyalty badge. It's an agreement between the planter class and the poor European workers. We will give you a psychological wage. We'll give you a status, a rung above someone else on the ladder. And in exchange for that, you agree to defend the system that is also exploiting you. Because at least you're not at the bottom. So be thankful for that. David Roediger called this the wages of whiteness. W.E.B. Du Bois identified it even before him. Read Theodore Allen. He documented it extensively. Theodore Allen. The mechanism is not disputed. This is a historical reality. And from that point on, whiteness was elastic. The definition of who counted as white would shift based on the needs of the economy and the needs of the political moment. The Irish, my ancestors, they came to America in the millions, fleeing from the Great Famine, which wasn't a famine at all. It was an imposed starvation because occupied white Ireland, occupied by the white English, they were forced to export their food to white England because the British needed their grain more than the Irish apparently needed to live. 1 million Irish people died. Another million of them emigrated. And when they arrived in America, they were not considered white. You see political cartoons from Harper's Weekly that depicted them with ape-like features alongside similar caricatures of black Americans. They were called white Negroes. Frederick Douglass, when he met the Irish in Ireland, he saw for himself what the British colonialism had done to them, and he said it wasn't very much different from what had been done to his people. He couldn't help but note the irony of the Irish immigrants arriving in America and immediately taking the side of the slaveholders so that they could claim the privilege of whiteness that they had been denied at home. The Irish became white in America by doing what whiteness required, distancing themselves from black Americans, so-called black Americans, filling the police forces, and enforcing the racial order. See, they paid the admission price. And this, by the way, no matter how many St. Patty's Day parades you hold over there in America, no matter how much green beer you drink, no matter how many shamrocks you plaster on your jacket, this behavior of the Irish immigrants coming to America has alienated the Irish in Ireland from Irish Americans forever because they adopted the oppressor's lens. They absorbed the oppressor's culture. And like I say, even the Italians were not white. In the American South, listen to this. In the American South in the late 19th century, Italians, particularly from the southern part of Italy, they were classified somewhere between white and black. They lived in black neighborhoods. They were basically segregated. in terms of where they lived. They worked alongside black workers. They were sometimes subject to the same Jim Crow restrictions. And in 1891, in New Orleans, 11 Italian immigrants were dragged from a prison by a mob, and they were all lynched. And this is actually the largest mass lynching in American history, Italians. The men had already been acquitted in court, but it didn't matter. They were acquitted, but it didn't matter. The mob came for them anyway, and that mob was led by some of the most prominent citizens in New Orleans. Citizens who later became mayors, who later became governors and renowned politicians. I bet you didn't know that that's the origin of Columbus Day, the lynching of Italian Americans, yes. Because it caused an international incident, and the United States government had to pay a small reparation to their families, and as a symbolic concession to Italian Americans, they created Columbus Day as a federal celebration in 1892. Imagine. And that's how Italians became white in America. It's an incoherent concept on every level, I'm telling you. The Polish, the Slavs, the Eastern Europeans, and so forth, they were categorized in the early 20th century by American eugenicists as racially inferior to Northwestern Europeans. You see, I told you they've always detested each other. They can't stand each other. There's a book by Madison Grant called The Passing of the Great Race, and they explicitly ranked Eastern Europeans as below the Anglo-Saxons and the Nordics. You know, Trump is going on and on about immigration and so forth, talking about bad hombres, and they're not sending us their best people and so forth, as if the best of any country would ever set foot in America. But there was an immigration act called the Immigration Restriction Act in 1924, and that was specifically designed to limit Eastern European immigration because they saw Eastern European people as racially undesirable in their country. That's what their so-called scientists told them. Don't even talk about the Jews. The Jews, obviously, they were classed completely separately from all other types of people. Those same eugenicists who ranked the Slavs also ranked the Jews, and they said that they were a distinct and threatening racial category. Madison Grant, Lothrop Stoddard, the whole American academic mainstream of eugenics. Understand, these were not fringe figures. These were Harvard professors. They were cited by legislators. Think about that when you glorify those Ivy League schools. And when you think about your senators, or you think that your senators or your congresspeople actually stand for some kind of moral values. Now, these Neanderthal bigots were among your most celebrated intellectuals, and they were nothing but Neanderthal bigots. Their work was translated into German, and it was praised by Adolf Hitler. He said that he had a debt. He owed a debt to American race science. He said that in Mein Kampf. Speaking of Germans, the Germans are the single largest ancestry group living in America today. Roughly 1 in every 7 Americans has German heritage. I also have German heritage on my mother's side. If you go back far enough, even the Germans themselves were categorized as barbarians. Now, they were pretty much always classified as white. Ever since white became a category, they were pretty much always considered white. But in America, they were subjected to intense suspicion and cultural erasure during both World Wars, World War I and World War II. There were even German Americans who were put into internment camps, like the Japanese were. Okay? Now, the English, that's the original template. That's the original WASP template, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That's the foundational American identity. I think everyone knows that. That's the official, original version of American whiteness, right? The Puritans of New England, the plantation aristocracy of Virginia, the Scot-Irish that settled in Appalachia and so forth. Those are the ones who later became known as the rednecks or the hillbillies or what have you. These are the building blocks. These are the building blocks of the founding cultural DNA of that country. I'm telling you, forget about white and actually learn about those people's history back where they came from. The Anglo-Saxons, the English, the French, the Germans, right? These are the main groups. These are your main groups in America. The origins of the American psyche. So when you know what they were like back in their lands of origin, if you know what they were like, then it's no wonder that the founding culture of America was built on stolen land, was built on enslaved labor. It was built on a set of decorative ideological documents declaring all men created equal, while viewing only their own kindred as men, their only skin tone as men. Understand, this isn't hypocrisy, not in the ordinary sense. No, they're being completely consistent. They're being completely consistent with their ancestral culture and their ancestral thinking. Dehumanization is an unspoken but fully understood and fully accepted component of their framing of equality. See, they'll say all people are equal, but what they won't say, but what they believe, is that not all people are people. For them, this goes without saying. It goes without saying. So when you ask who is white in America, the honest answer is who is white is whoever the system needs to be white at any given moment, in exchange, like I say, for enforcing it against those who are not. It's not a heritage, it's a job description. You understand? And the job is maintenance and enforcement of a hierarchical, predatory, exploitative, inhuman, oppressive, and ruthless social order. That's the job. And the upholding and the affirmation of and the advocacy for and the perpetuation of a backwards, primitive, simplistic, dishonest, shallow, immoral, immature, animalistic, satanic culture. That's the truth. So this is the background. This is the origin. This is the genealogy, the real DNA of American culture and the American system. Not your fake history, not your fairy tales and your fables, not your Johnny Appleseed, and not some ahistorical and unfactual whiteness. We're talking about a particular people coming from a particular region or from particular regions who have specific histories, who have specific lineages, cultural lineage of habits, lineage of ways of acting, ways of thinking, ways of operating in the world, that trace back consistently, trace back for millennia. Scavengers, hunters and gatherers, raiders and marauders, in the harsh wilderness of Germany, for example, what's now Germany, to the frigid Nordic lands in Scandinavia, to the barren, inhospitable rock of an island that's known now as the UK, the Gauls, the Franks, the French, the Anglo-Saxons, and so forth. Pagan, jinn-worshipping, constantly warring, constantly invading each other, pillaging each other, thieves and killers, tyrants and oppressors. That's the origin. Forever scrambling and fighting each other for dominance over resources in their own lands. Feudal lords and serfs. The very existence of America itself is the proof, all the proof that you need that this is the case. Europe was so vicious and so unlivable that the Europeans themselves fled to America. If it had been a fair and just and beautiful and enlightened and wonderful civilization, well, nobody would have had to run away from it. And this is the other thing that you have to understand, that the people who did run away from it, the people who ran away from it, did so because they wanted to be able to be themselves like the people that they were running away from. Do you understand me? They were tired of being robbed. They were tired of being oppressed. And they wanted to have a chance to be the ones doing the robbing. They wanted to have a chance to be the ones doing the oppressing. And that's why you have a country over there right now. That's why you have a country. And that's why the country is the way that it is. And that's why you are the way that you are. And like I say, whether you're classified as so-called white or you're classified as so-called black in that society, in that so-called civilization, or if you come from any sort of non-European, non-Anglo-Saxon origins, and whether you're rich and whether you're poor, whether you're upper class or lower class or working class, whether you're white collar or blue collar, whether you call yourself a conservative or you call yourself a liberal, whether you call yourself a traditionalist or you call yourself a progressive, whether you're on the right or whether you're on the left, I'm telling you, the psyche, the mentality, the frameworks, the paradigms, the way of understanding and the way of interacting and engaging, all of that, all of what I have just described regarding those Europeans, all of that is in you now. It's in you now because of all the mechanisms and all the institutions that I've been talking about. You've been Europeanized. You've been Anglo-Saxonized. You've been Germanized. That's that vat of acid that I said that you've been in, which you call the melting pot. But you, if you're a so-called minority in America, you didn't come from where they came from. You didn't live their ancestors' lives. You don't have their 10,000-year history. But you've been sucked into the riptide of that history, out of your own ancestral waters into the thick, polluted ocean of theirs. Now their pathologies are your pathologies. Their psyche is your psyche. Their mentality is your mentality. And the most distinctive thing about them is their absolutely unbreakable resistance to change and improvement. You don't change them, they change you into them. You understand me? Every single phase of their history is nothing but rebranding of the same culture, from pagan to Christian, from Christian to secular, from feudal to free market, from monarchy to democracy. These are all just veneers over a perfectly undented, completely intact structure of primal, permanent primitivity. You know, like how those tech CEOs, those rich people and whatnot, they want to upload their brains to a computer. They want to upload their brain into the cloud or something like that so that they can live on after they die. Well, you're the cloud. You're the cloud. You're the computer. Your society is. Those 10,000-year-old hunters and gatherers and marauders of Northern Europe and Western Europe, they got uploaded into the cloud. And now every one of you, every single one of you, is a device into which it has been downloaded, and it has erased completely your previous system, your previous operating system, your culture, your heritage, your history. Now you are the carriers of that culture, and you are the carriers of that heritage, which is not your own. That's why I say there's the origin and there's the originators. There's the impact and then there are the impacted. But at the end of the day, you're all Westerners now. You're all Westerners now. And you are all carrying on the history of those Europeans, even if you didn't come from there. You're carrying on their culture now, even though it's not your culture. It's not the culture that you come from originally. And now you're carrying on that same mindset, that same mentality. You have that same psyche. It doesn't matter if you're oppressed. It doesn't matter if you're oppressed over there. Remember what I said? The people who ran away from Europe to start that country to begin with, they were oppressed too. But they had the same mind as their oppressors. And it was actually that same mindset of their oppressors that made them run away in the first place. You understand? And this is what we see from you in the U.S. now. This is what we see from you. You're complaining about what? You're complaining about your material conditions, about your cost of living, about your wages, about your working conditions and so forth, about access to resources. Now, I'm not saying that those aren't genuine issues. Those are genuine issues. But you're not interested in the underlying causes of those issues, the root causes. You just want to get the things that you want. You just want your material comfort secured. So it's the same mentality. It's exactly the same mentality. Same instincts have been programmed into you. Even if your ancestral heritage is actually from a genuine civilization that actually understands the purpose of life as being more than that, more than material comfort, even if the culture of your ancestors had much more profound values than that, and they could find meaning and they could find contentment, they could find happiness in any situation, regardless of what their resources they had, or what comfort they had, or what discomfort they had to suffer. But that's not your culture anymore. Now you have the mentality of a European scavenger from 10,000 years ago. Even if your particular ancestors came from Asia, or your ancestors came from Africa or South America. Because that culture and that system obliterates everything but itself, I'm telling you. And unless you are a direct immigrant, like right now, an immigrant or a child of immigrants, if you're a first or second generation immigrant, a first or second generation American, and you still have family back in the motherland, you have connections and so forth. If you're not like that, if your family has been over there for more than a few generations, then you don't have any genuine connection to your ancestral culture, no matter what it is, no matter what culture it is. You can perform a connection, but you don't have a connection, not in any meaningful way, not in any functional way. In other words, to the people in your lands of origin, you're not going to be looked at as an us, you're going to be looked at as a them. I mean, if we're going to say that Western means white and white means Western, if we're going to say that white means carrying the culture, if we're going to go with that sort of a definition, then to everyone outside of America, every American is white, even if they're not looked upon as being white in America. Like I said, it doesn't matter if you are oppressed in America. It doesn't matter. That's irrelevant to this. Even if you're oppressed in America because in America you're not so-called white, you're still going to be seen as white by everyone outside because you're Western and you have a Western mentality. Even your so-called racial pride, you understand? Being proud of the fictional category that you have been assigned by the descendants of Europeans who artificially engineered a group identity for you by means of their insane discrimination and their insane hatred on the basis of the fictional categories that they themselves invented. Do you understand? You understand how crazy this is? That is entirely and uniquely Western. What you call black and brown people do not think of themselves as black and brown people anywhere in the world. They think of themselves as what they are. They think of themselves as Zulu or Kikuyu or Malay or Malayali or Tamil or what have you. I mean, in addition to being Kenyan, in addition to being Malaysian or whatever nationality it is. Their complexion is not how they identify, unless they're forced to identify with it because they're dealing with you. Because this completely insignificant, completely superficial, and meaningless aspect is literally the only thing that you see, and the only thing that determines how you're going to deal with them and how you're going to treat them. I mean, whether you discriminate against them or whether you align with them, it's the same. You're seeing them as their color. It doesn't matter if you're aligning with them or you're discriminating against them, because you're doing it on the basis of something that does not matter to them at all, but means everything to you, because you're Western. It's like Muslim da'is who debate with Christians using the Bible. Not because we think the Bible is valid, but because they think that the Bible is valid. So you won't listen to us if we talk to you about the Quran, so the da'i will customize it according to your level. Well, the Western level forces everyone to pretend that their made-up color chart of identity and race is valid, because it's valid to Westerners, only to Westerners. So do you see how disconnected that makes you from everyone in the world? No one else believes in this color is a race, color as nation, color as race, color as identity. They know their lineage, they know their tribe, they know their family, they know their history, they know their beliefs, they know their customs, and so on. They know everything that actually makes them a truly distinct people. Do you know how idiotic it is? How idiotic it is to think that people are supposed to get along with each other just because they have similarities in their appearance? It's literally as ludicrous as that comedy sketch, Tim Robinson, Shirt Brothers, right? Like we're wearing the same shirt, therefore we're brothers now. Who thinks like that? Who thinks like that? We look alike, so now we have to be part of the same group. Meanwhile, you actually have completely different history. You come from a different place. You have different beliefs. You have a different faith. You have different language, right? You have a different culture. Your living conditions are different. And we have absolutely nothing in common whatsoever in any meaningful, substantive way. But there's some sort of a similar aspect in how you physically look, so that now we're on the same team. Why would anyone do that? Well, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why they would do it. The only reason they would do that only under very specific conditions, only very specific scenario or situation, which is that they are dealing with someone who does not look like them. You understand me? Someone who does not look like them and who treats people according to how they look. And because that person is the one that they're dealing with, that person's framework has to be factored into how you interact with them. But then the next question is, why does their framework take precedence? Why is their framework catered to, but they don't have to cater to our frameworks or understand our frameworks? And the obvious reason for that, the obvious answer to that, is that you're dealing with a dangerous and violent person. And because they are dangerous and violent, I'm talking about the West, no one ever risks correcting their stupidity and arrogance. So that just ends up solidifying your disconnection from the rest of the people of the world. And it keeps you steeped in your own stupidity and ignorance and arrogance. So if you're someone in America whose heritage is from the global South, if you are by lineage, not by color, by lineage, a member of the global majority, and you're living in America, and in America you are classified as minorities, and in America you think of yourselves as so-called black or so-called brown people, well, you are perpetuating European thinking, Anglo-Saxon thinking. You are perpetuating Western thinking, or if you want to call it white thinking. Yes, only a white mind thinks of you that way. Only white eyes see you that way. The people that you come from don't see you that way. The people that you come from don't think of you that way. And people who look like you, but who are not the people that you come from by heritage, they do not see you that way either, and they do not think of you that way either. And the people that you come from are not going to embrace you because you look like them. They will embrace you because you are like them. Do you understand me? And if you're not like them, then looking like them is not going to count for anything with them. That's not going to win you any points, because it shouldn't. Because externally, you might look like them, but internally, mentally, you are thinking with the Western mind. You're thinking with the colonizer's mind. You're thinking with the oppressor's mind about yourself and about them. I hope you understand me. Affected and infected. But theoretically, you at least do have an actual culture that you can try to connect to. An alternative culture that you can try to connect to. The culture that your ancestors came from. Now, if you're African American, as in if you're a descendant of enslaved Africans, I'm saying, not the children of African immigrants, but the descendants of enslaved people, then obviously this is not going to be a straightforward issue for you. Inshallah, I'll talk more about that in a minute. And if you're part of the American shrinking majority, so-called white people, you're part of the global minority, you see, the shrinking majority, even when they created the supercategory of whiteness, even when they created the supercategory of whiteness and they added all of these people to it, incorporated all of these people that they used to exclude from that category, like the Irish, like the Italians, like the Slavs and so forth, the Eastern Europeans and so on, even when they did that, they still can't maintain a majority in their own country. And they can't prevent their decline in demographic numbers. Imagine if they still counted, or if they still didn't count the Irish and the Italians and the Eastern Europeans as white. What if they still didn't? They'd already be a minority in that country. If you took out the Italians, if you took out the Irish, you took out the Jews, you took out the Slavs, then so-called white people in that country would maybe be 30% of the population in America. But okay, if you're someone in America who comes from them, who comes from, by heritage, those European cultures that I've been talking about, you come from, the origins, like I say, the origins and the originators of all of this, then the culture that you're in is the culture that you came from. And is what came from your culture. You understand? So you don't have an alternative culture to try to connect to. The BTK killer, he had children. And those children couldn't go out in the market and try and find themselves some different alternative father to have, some alternative parent. You're stuck with what you're stuck with. And even if you come from the people who used to not be classified as white, there's two things here. There's two things. First of all, you may possibly know that you are of, for example, Irish heritage, like I do, or Italian heritage, or Slavic, or what have you. But most likely, you have no real connection to that heritage at all, except on some sort of, sentimental level, or abstract level, or performative level. The Irish Americans and the Italian Americans are frankly notorious for their performative connection to the homeland, without really having one at all. Most of the time, you don't speak the language. Most of the time, you don't know the history, actually. Most of the time, you've never been there. Maybe you like the food. Unless you're Irish. Maybe you like the food. Maybe you like the music. But you don't think like the Irish people in Ireland or the Italian people in Italy. It's not your culture anymore. That individual culture. Like again, if someone got adopted when they were a little baby and they got raised by their adopted family, and then as an adult, they met their genealogical mother or father, well, to you, that's just some old man. That's just some old woman. They're a stranger to you. You don't know them at all. You weren't influenced by them at all. They didn't shape you. There's just a vague understanding that you're supposed to feel something towards them. You're supposed to feel some kind of a connection, but you don't. In reality, you don't, okay? That's not your culture anymore. I'm talking about the distinct culture of your individual heritage, like specifically Irish or Italian or Polish culture or something like that. So that's one. But the other thing is that anyway, the truth is that even if you could connect to those individual cultures, it's not going to lead to any sort of an improvement for you. Because Europe, the truth is, Europe, continentally, as a whole, is very strange. There's something wrong with them. Wallahi, there's something wrong with them. When I was talking about the history, when I'm telling you about the history, I'm talking about the history across the whole continent. Individual culture after individual culture. Do you understand me? You see all the same characteristics in each one. The jinn worship, the violence, the feudalism, the superficiality, the lack of any real intellectual or moral depth, the adoration and the worship of raw power, brute force, the scavenger mentality, the moral hypocrisy. And in every single individual culture on the continent, you'll see the same unparalleled stubbornness to resist civilizing. So trying to connect with those cultures, the cultures that all melded together anyway to become what America is, that's not going to benefit you in any way whatsoever. Connecting to a culture that is impervious to change so that you can change, now that's not a good strategy. That's not going to get you anywhere. These were not noble people. They weren't virtuous, honorable, decent people with an honorable and decent and virtuous civilization. That's not what existed. Just look at the disconnect. Look at the dissonance that Americans and Westerners have. I can't count how many times I've seen Westerners online mocking the people of India, for example, for how easily they were colonized. How just a handful of British soldiers and administrators were able to completely subjugate a vastly larger population, right? I've seen them saying the same sorts of things about Africans, about African slaves in America. And of course, because they have fully integrated the racist programming, they will say that this docility in the part of Indians and Africans, this passivity, this passiveness, demonstrates inferiority, and they'll mock them for being so easy to oppress and control and subjugate. Well, all right. Now, I just told you that 4 out of 5 Europeans was a peasant, was a serf, was a human being who was actually a piece of farming equipment for their feudal masters. They couldn't move, they couldn't marry. The feudal lord even got to sleep with your bride before you did if he wanted to. And you couldn't do anything about it. You were slaves in everything but name. 4 out of 5 of you. 4-to-1 majority. Like that for 1,000 years. Okay, the British Raj in India was less than 100 years. I mean, sure, the East India Company was there and their reign was longer than that, but it was still nowhere near as long as how long you accepted being farm tools for your feudal masters. And it's even longer than that, actually, if you look at how miserable things were before feudalism was instituted. No, I don't know of any people in the world who were easier to pacify and easier to subjugate than your people. And that wasn't even from invaders. But you never think about that. You never think about that reality. You think about the great white conquerors. Meanwhile, you yourselves were the most thoroughly conquered and the most obsequious people that you yourselves ever conquered. I mean, think it through. Your history, in terms of, as an organized society, in terms of governance, your whole history is one side or the other of the same coin. One side or the other of the same coin, tyranny and cowardice. Tyranny and cowardice in the face of tyranny. Subservience. Means like 3 archetypes. You had the West, you can say the West produced 3 personality archetypes. The tyrant, the slave, and the collaborator. And everyone in the West is one of these 3, I'm telling you. And it's usually pretty easy to spot which one they are. And the tyrant is the one that they all want to be. The tyrant is the one that they all want to be, and you will be able to detect that if you interact with them long enough, even if they're coming to you like a so-called ally. The slave, the collaborator, and the tyrant all have the same instincts in the West. I told you, there is an us and there is a them. Oh, this is going to be a long talk. This is going to be a long talk. Okay, I know it all started with the idea of us being allies with them or them being allies with us. But you just don't comprehend, and I'm trying to help you to comprehend how incredibly different you are from normal people. I mean, just normal people around the world, never mind how different you are from Muslims. I said there's something wrong with you. I said there's something wrong with you. I don't know exactly when it happened in your history, when it started in your history, but you can't not see it. I don't know, maybe your ancestors, too many of your ancestors in prehistory, thousands of years ago, maybe they were too malnourished or something. Allahu alam. Maybe they cannibalized too much and it caused defects or something that got passed down generationally. Wallahi, I don't know. I don't know what caused it, but it goes back very, very far. And then all of these peculiarities of yours got structuralized, got systematized, got institutionalized, and then it turned that all into the dysfunctional, peculiar societies that you have, the peculiar so-called civilization that you have. I mean, the complete imperviousness to development and to change, to me, is really striking and the most striking. You know, Malcolm X, our Mukhtar, the Mukhtar of American Muslims, of revert Muslims, Malcolm X said that the only thing that could save America is Islam, and of course he's right. Of course he was right. But that's not going to happen on a societal level. I don't believe so. I don't believe that's going to happen on a societal level. The best that you can do is embrace Islam yourself as an individual, one by one. Save yourself. Because that so-called civilization is not going to change ever. They are never going to change. They only became Christian in the first place because Christianity enthusiastically adapted to suit their whims. Christianity easily catered to their desires, and Christianity was elastic enough to become whatever they wanted it to be, which was whatever they already had. And that's what Christianity became, what they already had. Well, you can't do that with Islam. Western so-called civilization is the proverbial immovable object. It doesn't give. It doesn't give an inch. Whatever comes to it becomes like it. You don't change it, it changes you into it. Well, that's impossible with Islam. Europe had the chance. They had a chance to embrace Islam for hundreds of years. But subhanAllah, even those European countries that basked in the benefits of the Muslims, like Spain, like Sicily, even after being part of the Muslim world and becoming centers of sophistication, centers of learning, centers of prosperity, subhanAllah, they fought their way out of sophistication and learning and prosperity. I talked about it before, the Austrians, the drunken, landless peasants who stupidly fought against the Ottomans in order to preserve their own oppression under their aristocracy. Subhanallah, until today, they'll beat their chest at being successful in rescuing their misery from the threat of peace and prosperity under the Muslims. That's one of Pete Hegseth's tattoos, the date that Austria saved itself from the prospect of a decent society. Same as now, banning Muslim immigration to the U.S. because goodness knows we can't have all these non-alcoholic, non-drug addicted, unpromiscuous, stable families coming to our country. God forbid. We don't want God-fearing people here, praying all the time, fasting all the time, giving charity. America's not that kind of party. But he was right. Of course, Malcolm X was right, obviously. It's not just a throwaway line. It's not just rhetoric. When he said that, he meant it. Only Islam can save America. I know it's the last thing that you want to hear. I know you don't want to hear it. But even if I was not a Muslim, anyone should be intelligent enough and objective enough to see that this is, in fact, the only sensible, practical, workable option that you have as Americans. I mean, just look at so-called black and white. Like I say, just look at it in terms of their terms, their framework, black and white. If you're so-called white, you cannot connect or reconnect with your culture from your lands of origin. You can't do that if you come from European ancestry because you're already living in it. And it's already horrendous. There's no way out from there. That's not the way out. And if you're so-called black, your ancestry is in Africa. Never mind what the so-called FBAs want to pretend about being indigenous. I'm talking to serious people. I'm talking to serious people only. I'm talking to adult, mature, serious people. Anyone who calls themselves an FBA, no, you're FBI. That's a COINTELPRO PSYOP through and through just to keep you as a so-called minority in that country. But even if you are African American and you know that you are African American, you understand me? You know that that your descendants are from Africa. In this case, the descendants of enslaved people. It's not easy to know your pre-American lineage in Africa. Sometimes you can't even know your lineage inside the United States in America, Most Americans at this point only know their family history back 2 generations, maybe 3 generations. Like they'll know their grandparents, maybe. They'll know maybe their great-grandparents. But even knowing their great-grandparents, that mostly just means their names. They don't know much else. And those DNA tests, those don't actually tell you anything. Not really. They don't tell you anything about where you truly came from. That's just a scam to collect your samples for a database. So it's very hard for Americans, for all types of Americans, but especially for African Americans. It's very difficult to even locate their original culture, to even locate their place of origin, their culture of origin. I've said it before. If you put indigenous people aside, obviously, the Native American people aside, obviously, I think it's fair to say that African Americans, by all rights, are the most American that you can be. The most purely American, because they were cut off from their origins, completely cut off. They, as a community, are the creation of America. So I can understand why African Americans would maybe reject the idea of connecting themselves with Africa or trying to feel an affiliation with Africa or something like that, because the truth of the matter is that they are the most unique and the most distinct community in the United States. For all intents and purposes, they don't have a pre-American history, you understand? For the entire time that they have been in that country, they have been defined as black people, a fictional category of humanity that's not associated with any land or any history or any origin, except for the origin of the invention of the category itself. You understand? I mean, the estrangement and the disconnection that I talked about with regards to so-called white Americans, the disconnection that they have in relation to their lands of origin, that's infinitely magnified for African Americans. I mean, even that term, African American, that signifies a whole continent, not a country, a whole continent, not even a region of a continent. And like, say you try to connect. If you're African American and you try to connect somehow, even superficially, like you get some clothes or something, some decor, some artifacts or what have you, to try to Africanize your living space. Okay, first of all, you may or may not know whether or not any of these artifacts or these things actually come from or actually represent where your particular family came from. And secondly, you might not even be getting it right. You might not even be getting it right. Mixing and matching random symbols or random artifacts or what have you, crafts and so forth. That if someone from Africa saw that, they might see it and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. They'll immediately look at it and say, that doesn't make any sense. These things come from two completely different tribes in two completely different regions or something. So it's an almost completely unfixable conundrum for African Americans, in my opinion. Americans, whether they are so-called white or whether they are so-called black, they are completely isolated, completely insulated, completely disconnected, and completely adrift. Marooned in that country. Like I said, it's like you're at the bottom of a well. It's like you're at the bottom of a well, just existing in that country and carrying the mentality of a country that is itself the product of a history that you've been lied to about, that you don't even know or that you have been cut off from if you're African American. You have origins that none of you have a plausible option to connect with as a way out of the well. You're trapped in a world of fiction. White is a fiction and black is a fiction. But where you are in your society, both are real, which means that you are trapped in a world of fiction. Do you understand me? And the real world is inaccessible to you, even while the real world impacts you. The real world impacts you, but you can never understand what's happening because the real world does not operate according to the rules of your fictional world. You've never been anything but lied to. You've never been anything but misled and miseducated. You've never been anything but gaslit. You've never been anything but propagandized. So now your minds are full of wrong definitions, wrong categories, wrong metrics, wrong frameworks. You know, the world is in 3D, but you only see 2D or even 1D, black and white. The first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did when he created Adam alayhi salam was to teach him the names of things. Do you understand? Accurate understanding about what is. But your culture, your so-called civilization, erased that for you. So now you yourselves became vessels of ignorance. That's literally what you bring to the world now. That's the only thing that you bring to the world. No matter what your heritage culture was, no matter what your land of origin was, no matter where your ancestors originally came from, even if your ancestors came from the global south, now you yourself actually see your own people. You look at your own people in Africa, in Asia, in so-called Latin America, your own people from the global south. You see them the same way that your Western culture sees them. That ignorant, arrogant, flattened scavenger culture of Europe. And so now you make no sense. You yourself make no sense whatsoever to your own people anymore. Your original people, I'm saying. I said white is a job description, and the job is the maintenance of the social order, that particular social order, and the enforcement and the upholding of that mercenary value system. And in exchange for that, you get that psychological wage I told you, the psychological salary of having a status within that order. See, look at which so-called whites in America are notorious for being the most blatantly racist in that country and the most buffoonishly patriotic. Why, it's no one but the Italians and the Irish. The Irish and the Italian Americans, they got the status for doing the job. Even if they themselves are still stereotyped in the popular culture of America. Drunken brawlers and mafiosos. They used to call them inside out N-words. So now they're considered white. They're considered white because they carry the culture. Because they defend the system. They enforce and they reinforce the social order and the mythology and the indoctrination. So what about you? If you come from the people of the global south, if your people come out of the global south, if your heritage is non-European, non-Anglo-Saxon and so forth, if you are the descendants of enslaved Africans, if you're the descendants of dispossessed and displaced Mexicans, or any of the people of Central and South America, of Asia, of the Philippines, India, Middle East, and so forth, and you're out here talking about the Constitution, the U.S. Bill of Rights, you're talking about democracy and equality and Western values and America the beautiful and whatnot, well, you're nothing but an unpaid white. You're unpaid whites doing the job, but you're not getting the status and you're not going to get the status. You're unpaid whites. Listen to me, I told you that the actual descendants of the original people, the originators of that predatory, debased culture, the originators of that culture, the descendants of Europe, they're dying out. They're dying out. They're shrinking as a population. They had to start, like I say, they had to start integrating other people into the super category of whiteness just to boost their numbers. Like I said, they brought in the Irish, they brought in the Italians, brought in the Poles, the Slavs, the Jews, and what have you, just to try to maintain the fabricated majority. Even though the WASPs themselves, they never really regarded these people as genuine whites. They never regarded these groups as genuine whites, because white never meant skin color between Europeans, except in relation to non-Europeans. It was about skin color when it related to Africans or Mexicans or whatever else, or Asians and so forth. But between the descendants of Europe, their skin is all pale. So white never referred to skin color. It referred to a position in the social order, in the power hierarchy built by the Anglo-Saxons. Now, the ones that they hated in Europe, they still hated in America. The ones that they oppressed and exploited in Europe, they oppressed and exploited in America. But they gave them honorary white status because they played the role. They did the job. They played the role in relation to the descendants of non-Europeans and non-Anglo-Saxons. And like I say, they got a status from that. They got a status from that. They were able to circumvent the discrimination, circumvent the prejudice, and gain some sort of mainstream acceptance and mainstream acknowledgement. You know, they got their holidays and whatnot. But even with this addition to the category, even with adding these people to the category, like I say, they're still becoming a minority. They're becoming a minority in America. And their demographic numbers are falling globally. They're falling off a cliff. Which is why I need you to understand this transference that has happened. How those European marauders from 10,000 years ago, they got their culture uploaded into the cloud of Western so-called civilization and now downloaded into you. Downloaded into your mind. Because now you are the carriers of this culture. You are the carriers of this mentality, this perspective, this dysfunction. And it's going to live on in you. It's going to live on through you. The originators are going extinct. That way of looking at the world, that way of interacting, that way of dealing with things, dealing with people, dealing with situations, those frameworks. That's all going to live on in you. That's going to all be carried on through you. You are now the perpetuators of that American mythology and that American mindset, that American worldview, that American mentality. That's why I'm telling you that the system has never been your fundamental problem. The system itself is not the problem. The system was formed by a mentality. And now you have that mentality. Yes, you do. Even if you think, even if you are opposed to the system, even if you think of yourself as opposition, you think of yourself as revolutionary or what have you, even if you protest and you march and you read Marx and you have a Che Guevara t-shirt or what have you, even if you chant "Eat the Rich," you have not confronted the roots of the system. Think about what I'm actually telling you. The people who invented this system, whose culture gave birth to this system, who built it and who refined it over 10 millennia, the people who are the natural inheritors and the most authentic expression of that culture, they're disappearing. Their birth rates are collapsing. Like I say, their demographic weight is shrinking in their own countries. In their own countries, in their own cities, they're becoming minorities. The system that they built is consuming them the same way that it consumes everything and anything else. Anything and anyone. And in just a generation or two or three, the originating population will no longer be the majority anywhere. They won't be a majority anywhere. And yet the civilization continues. The so-called civilization continues because of you. That's the most devastating thing that you need to understand. The West did not win. The West did not gain prominence because of military power. They didn't win because of economic dominance even. These are just temporary advantages. They won because they colonized your mind. And a colonized mind doesn't need an army to enforce it or to maintain it. It maintains itself. It reproduces itself. It passes itself on to the next generation voluntarily. It passes itself on to the next generation enthusiastically and proudly. You do the work for free. You're the unpaid maintenance crew of a so-called civilization built by people who never even considered you human. You know, it's like if the slaves working on a plantation continue working on that plantation after the master's house has burned down with the master inside of it. You understand? Frantz Fanon wrote about this. He talked about this a lot. The colonized person who internalizes the colonizer's frameworks, he doesn't experience that as colonization. He doesn't think he's being colonized. To him, it's aspirational. To him, he thinks it's progress. He's becoming civilized, self-improvement. So now the original colonizer is himself expendable at that point because the colonized do the job themselves. The colonized take over the role of the colonizer. See, once you colonize the mind, the body follows after that. Once the framework is installed, the person polices their own thinking. They police each other. They pass the mythology down to their children. They defend the institutions. They attach themselves to the institutions. They attach themselves to the framework. So now if you attack the framework, if you question the framework, it becomes you questioning or challenging or confronting their whole identity. To challenge the framework is to challenge them. That's you. This is what has happened to you in the West. This is what has happened to you. See, you probably come from a people, in many cases, you come from a people who are most likely among the most sophisticated civilizations on earth before the Europeans arrived to destroy everything. The empire in Mali, the Mali Empire, at their height, they had a GDP that historians estimate represented roughly half of the entire wealth of the earth. The university in Timbuktu was operating centuries before Oxford was. You had empires in Southeast Asia that governed maritime networks that were so complex, extraordinarily complex. The Ottoman system of governance was administratively more sophisticated than anything that Europe has ever had. The mathematical accomplishments, the mathematical and astronomical traditions in the Indian subcontinent that preceded and exceeded anything that they had in Europe. The Chinese, they had gunpowder, they had paper, they had printing, they had the compass and so forth, had a functioning civil service, while the Europeans were still sleeping with their pigs and their goats. See, that's your actual heritage. That's where that's the people that you actually came from. But now you're out here defending the copy and paste Constitution, the copy and paste American Constitution. You're defending Americanism. I know many of you don't think that you are. You don't think that you are. You'll think, for example, I'm black, or I'm brown, or I'm poor. I know that this country was never for me. You'll say that. You'll say we've always known this. I'm not indoctrinated. I see it. I know. I've suffered in this country. Therefore, I don't have the same mentality as this country. Who told you? I'm asking, who told you that just because you suffer, just because you are oppressed, just because you're marginalized, just because you're excluded, that somehow automatically means that you don't think exactly like the people who are mistreating you? No, one does not automatically lead to the other. I'm telling you, you are disgruntled. You're disgruntled about your marginalization. You're disgruntled about the exclusion. And if you got included, you would join. If you had a way to join, you would join. You're not mad at the mean girls because they're mean. You're mad at the mean girls because they're mean to you. And you're still looking for inclusion. You're out here arguing about which political party is going to better represent your interests. That's myth maintenance. You're out here performing allegiance to institutions that were built specifically to exclude you. And you think, you tell each other and you tell yourselves, if we could just get the right people, Brother Shaheed, if we could just get the right people in those positions, then we can finally make America live up to its values. No, America has always lived up to its values. You see, you're still believing in the pretty words. You still believe somehow that America just took a wrong turn at some point. That it was really always supposed to actually be virtuous and wonderful, and something went wrong. Something went terribly wrong. No, I'm telling you, nothing went wrong. It's exactly the way it's supposed to be, the way it was intended to be. See, this is why you have to understand the staggering continuity of their primitive savagery across millennia, because America is a part of that continuum. It's not a departure from that continuum, you see? Please, call things what they are. Call things by their right names. Western history is a rap sheet of continuous crimes and atrocities. They have been a scourge upon the earth. They were a scourge to each other first. They were a scourge towards each other first. And then they were a scourge to the rest of the world the moment they learned how to sail on a boat. You've been lied to your whole life. You've been lied to your whole life, and now you don't even know what honesty sounds like. It's a completely alien language to you. You can't speak honesty. You literally don't have the vocabulary. Have you seen when a Muslim da'i debates a Christian? I don't know if there's any better demonstration of Western cognitive dysfunction than those debates. Personally, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of these sorts of things, this sort of format. Personally, I'm dubious about how useful they are. But if for nothing else, it's a very useful display because it's on full display. The complete Western incapacity for reason and rational thought, and their ability to even follow the thread of a conversation, the thread of a discussion for more than 3 sentences. The Muslims come prepared. The Muslims come prepared. They know the Christians' book better than the Christians do. I mean, the truth of the matter is most of them don't even know what's in their Bible. Most of them don't even read their Bible. Meanwhile, if a Muslim so much as mispronounces one single letter when reciting the Quran, the whole the comment section is going to be flooded with Muslims correcting him. Alhamdulillah. Meanwhile, you all can have Pete Hegseth reciting the gospel according to Quentin Tarantino, and you've got every Christian in the audience bowing their heads in solemn devotion, subhanAllah. You got deacons, Christian deacons and whatnot, saying that they need to write a new chapter. They need to write a new gospel. They need to write a new book and add it to the Bible because there's so much in that book that's problematic for them. But anyway, you have the Muslims, right? You have the Muslims going to these debates. They bring their evidence, they bring their arguments, and they're expecting counter evidence and counter arguments. They think that's how it's going to go, but all they get is deflection. All they get is emotional rambling. All they get is incoherent, derailing, whataboutism, complete gibberish. That's what they get in response. It's completely just a showcase of Western cognitive impairment, subhanAllah. A Muslim debating a Christian is like having Usain Bolt participating in the Special Olympics, I'm telling you. But no, it's not just the Christians. I know the atheists are going to get happy when they hear me say that, but no, you're the last people on earth who should get happy. You're worse than the Christians are. Honestly, the atheists are worse than the Christians are with their pretensions, their pretensions, their posing, their formulaic, predictable, infantile arguments. They're the most unserious people that you will ever meet, these atheists, these so-called intellectuals. I've said it before, most of what we know, what we recognize as the West's worst crimes, their worst atrocities, all of that savagery that's within living memory, at the very least, that was all under the banner of so-called secularism. Their most hideous crimes all happened after the Enlightenment. That's all post-Enlightenment. No, you can't argue, you can't debate. You can't. You can't argue or debate in anything like an honest intellectual manner. You just play word games. You never have any points, you only have tactics. That's all you bring. You have tactics and techniques. You have tactics and techniques specifically for hiding the fact that you don't have any points. And this is your whole discourse. Like I said, it's all unreality. It's all false. And it doesn't resonate with anyone in the world, not anymore. But now the most colonized minds are in the West itself. Like I said, that's you. The people who are the descendants of the colonized have adopted the colonizer mindset. While their own people, the formerly colonized people, in the formerly colonized lands, they're breaking free from colonization. But in the diaspora in the West, they have absorbed mental whiteness. Even while the physically so-called white in the West are dwindling. See, this is what colonization of the mind actually means. Psychological colonization, what it actually means. It's not that someone forced you to think this way at gunpoint. It's that they created an incentive system. They created or they engineered the conditions in the society so that thinking this way is the only path to survival, it's the only path to acceptance, it's the only path to anything resembling normalcy within the system. So then generation by generation, family by family, the original frameworks of your own heritage, they get replaced. Maybe your grandparents held on to something. Maybe your parents held on to a little bit. But by the time it gets to you, if you were born and raised inside that system, there's almost nothing left of your original heritage, your original operating system. Just traces, just, cultural performances, food, music, holidays, what have you. Holidays, ceremonies, whatever, that have been completely emptied of any deeper meaning. They're just reduced to aesthetics. Costume without content. See, the originating culture, like I say, the originating culture is declining. So the so-called civilization as a European project is running out of Europeans who are willing or able to carry it forward. So what was supposed to happen, what the natural course of history would have produced without the mental, psychological colonization, is that as the European demographic dominance declined, so would their perspectives, so would their values, so would their frameworks. And the rest of the world would have filled that space that was left by their absence. You understand? African frameworks, Asian frameworks, Islamic frameworks. The civilizational diversity that the West always suppressed and flattened, that would re-emerge as the West contracted. That's what should be happening. Instead, you're happening. You, the descendants of the colonized, the children of the enslaved people, the children and grandchildren of the dispossessed. Now you're carrying it forward. You're carrying forward this supposed to be dead way of thinking. You are now the carriers. This is why personally I don't get enthused when I hear about the statistic that Islam is spreading faster in America than anywhere else in the world. You hear that all the time. But Islam, as taught by who? As taught by what? Georgetown University? Taught by Yale, the Muslim Brotherhood, colonizer collaborators, Yankee Doodle Muslims, Muslims who hate the Arab world, Muslims who hate the Muslim governments, Muslims who want to topple all our leaders and destabilize our countries. A Muslim diaspora that has exactly the same colonizer mentality, that sees our people in the Muslim world as backward, that accuse the Ummah of being sellouts while they themselves are sitting up there in Houston and Virginia and New York paying taxes to keep America afloat. No, a Muslim diaspora of unpaid whites, you understand me? Adopting the same Western frameworks, the same hypocrisy, the same performative morality, the taqwa signaling, That's what we're going to have. So you have the demographic numbers that the West is losing. You have the youth population that the West doesn't have. You have the geographic spread that the West never had. And you're using all of that to perpetuate the exact same dysfunction. The exact same dysfunction, the exact same dysfunctional frameworks, the exact same civilizational pathology that was used to destroy your ancestors that forced you to go over there in the first place. And you're not doing that because you're forced to. You're doing that because you opted for belonging and for assimilation to a people who do not and never will see you as people. See, the West doesn't need to survive demographically in order to survive civilizationally. It just needs you to keep believing in it and for you to take the banner from them and carry on. And many of you do that, even if you don't know that that's what you're doing. Because we've seen this before. Think about the global South countries that achieved formal independence from European colonialism. Okay? And then they immediately organized their economies, they organized their legal systems, they organized their educational institutions, they organized even their foreign policy around Western frameworks. Not because a gun was pointed at their head, but because the people in those countries who had been educated in Western institutions, who had absorbed Western epistemology, who had been told that development meant resembling the West, that advancement and sophistication and civilization meant resembling and copying the West, those people became the leaders. And they led their countries back into the same orbit that they had formerly liberated themselves from. They turned colonialism into neocolonialism. You can't decolonize a country from the outside in. You cannot remove the colonial power and keep the colonial mind and expect any sort of a different result, different outcome. See, that's why you have to look at the underlying causes. You have to look at the assumptions, the definitions, the epistemological frameworks. The colonial power is the colonial mind. That is the power. If you remove the soldiers but leave the epistemology, you haven't done anything. You've done nothing whatsoever to liberate yourselves. This isn't my opinion. This is documented history, the documented history of post-colonial governance on every single continent on the earth. And the same principle applies to you individually inside America, inside the West. Your own liberation, if that word is supposed to mean anything real whatsoever, it cannot happen while you are thinking inside their frameworks, while you are measuring progress by their metrics, while your definition of success is their definition of success, while your understanding of what a human being is supposed to be, is supposed to want, is supposed to do, is supposed to value, is supposed to prioritize, is their understanding. You're never going to get anywhere like this. You understand? Your ancestors didn't come from a people with no framework. This is why I'm talking to you about returning to or reconnecting with your old civilization. Because your people came from civilizations that had sophisticated frameworks, coherent frameworks, profound frameworks for understanding what a human being is, what community owes its members, how you're supposed to prioritize, what life is about, and the relationship between this life and the akhirah, this life and the next. Now, their frameworks were not primitive. They were never primitive. They weren't sitting around waiting to be replaced by something better. No, they were deliberately, systematically, violently dismantled by the West, by the colonizers, because the colonizers understood that if a people have their own framework, they cannot be fully controlled. A people who know who they are cannot ever be fully convinced to become what you need them to be, what you want them to be. So they took the framework and they replaced it with their own. They replaced it with their own way of thinking. And now you yourselves have become the vessel of that replacement framework and walking around thinking it's your framework. This is why I say the most important liberation is not political. It's not even economic. It's epistemological. It's the reclamation of the right to think from your own foundation, your own frameworks, your own standards, your own definitions of what this life is for. Everything else follows from that, and nothing else follows without it. You can't build on a foundation that's not your own. And right now, most of you are building on theirs. I'm telling you, subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is literally bringing their structures down, and you're over there trying to prop them up. See, when you see them, when you see the Americans, when you see, so-called white Americans, especially liberals, when you see them looking for allies, you also see this to one extent or another on the other side too, on the right wing, on the Republican side. They're all looking for allies. And when you see them looking for allies, you think that's your chance. That you think that's your chance to gain white status, like the Irish, the Italians, the Slavs, the Jews, and what have you. Because again, you don't understand the transaction. You don't understand the transaction. And you don't understand the transaction because somehow you actually still believe that the system is what it says it is. And you believe that the culture actually believes in the values that they espouse. Bless your heart. And you think that every instance of unfairness and every instance of discrimination and every instance of racism and bigotry, you think all of those instances were some kind of glitch. It's because they're ignorant. It's because they don't know any better. It's because they're really decent, good-hearted people, but they just have a fear of the other. We just have to overcome that with understanding. We have to overcome their fear. No, that's never been the issue. That's never been the issue. Total compliance is the issue. Total obsequiousness is the issue. You understand me? They don't tolerate anything other than themselves. The transaction is for you to accept that and for you to enforce that. Look, I mentioned earlier about the loneliness epidemic. You can't separate that. You can't separate these things. You can't separate that from their scrounging around for allies. It's the same thing and for the same reasons. They have no friends, they have no relationships, and they have no allies. Because they're impossible. Because they're dysfunctional. Because they're self-absorbed and because they're sociopathic and because they're predatory and parasitic. They want friends and they want partners and they want allies because they need someone to feed off of. You understand me? They need someone to use. They need someone to extract from. And they need someone to blame and to throw under the bus when things go sideways. Please understand me. You cannot be allies with people who are not even allies to their own. You understand me? I told you, slaves, collaborators, and tyrants, that's what you have. And which one they will be will depend entirely upon who they are dealing with. If they can collaborate with the tyrants, they will do it. If they can be the tyrant because of relative power asymmetry in their relationship with you, they will be the tyrant with you. And they'll be the slave if the power asymmetry is not in their favor. How can you be allies with that? There's no principle here. Yes, okay, I'm talking primarily to Muslims, to my own people, and to the people of the global South. But Westerners and Americans, you should understand this too. You have to understand this too about yourselves and about each other. Because you're not only this way with us, you're just this way. And you ought to try to understand that. And like I said, I know that many of you will object to what I'm saying, and you will tell me and you will assure me that you are the exception to everything that I'm saying. You know, the not all Westerners argument. But I've said this before. Maybe you are. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't the exception. But just the fact that you activate the exception argument in the first place as a reflex response to completely valid and completely accurate civilizational criticism indicates that you are not an exception whatsoever. That's the same old dishonesty. You know, that disingenuous pointing out of an anomaly in order to so-called disprove an entirely legitimate generality. Because if you were truly an exception to the rule, you would be agreeing with the criticism, not getting defensive about the criticism. But like I said, all they ever do is pursue self-validation. Never forget that. All they ever do is pursue self-validation. You absolutely have to know this anytime that you're dealing with them. I'm telling you, there's always an ulterior motive, and it's always the same ulterior motive to get you to legitimize their falsehood. You know, including the falsehood that, for example, they believe in human rights. They care about human rights. They care about peace. They care about nonviolence. They care about equality. They care about tolerance. They care about the protection of children, the protection of women, or whatever the case may be. No, they don't care about those things. They don't care about any of those things. Not on a civilizational level, not culturally. No, they don't care about any of those things. There's no evidence whatsoever that they care about these things, and there's nothing but evidence that they don't care about any of these things. In fact, that they're hostile to all of these things. But they will, you know, for example, they will hurl accusations against, say, China or against the Muslim world or against Africa or what have you, whatever the case is. You're undemocratic. You're undemocratic. You oppress this group or that group. You don't have the freedom of this or the freedom of that, and so forth. And then you get tricked into proving to them that, no, we're good. We're good. We have rights. We have freedom. No, boss, we're as good as you. They trick you into that argument. And then mission accomplished for them. That's all they're interested in. They don't care about the rights of your people, not whatsoever. Not at all. They only want you to affirm the lie that they are people who care about rights. Because they do not. But they are obsessed. They are obsessed with making everyone pretend that they are a people who care about rights. And that's the only reason that they ever accuse anyone of any sort of a violation. That's the only reason they do it. Because no matter what it is, whatever the violation it is, whatever violation they're accusing someone else of committing, they already committed worse than that before lunchtime. Because this is the only way that they can assume any sort of moral authority is by means of you playing along with the idea that they have any moral authority. I'm telling you, it's like there's infinite layers, subhanAllah, there's infinite layers of dishonesty. You have no idea. And like I say, especially if you live over there, and you've lived over there for generations, I'm telling the truth. You don't have any idea because you think the same way, because you are the same way. Even you calling yourself an exception is just another layer of the dishonesty. You have to understand, it's all fraudulent, all of it. It's all fraudulent across the board, start to finish. Conservative, liberal, doesn't matter. It's a smokescreen. This is all part of why they are the way they are. The foundational reasons of why they are the way they are. They think virtue and they think morality can be best performed by, this way or by that way. That's all that is. That's all that your right and your left are. That's all. That there is no real right or left. You understand? There's just different ways of performing the theater of goodness. You understand? Instead of being good, Marx makes me good. That's the proof. Conservatism is the proof that I'm good. This ideology or that ideology is the proof. They want to refer character judgment to any sort of credentials or any sort of evidence other than actions. Right? I'm a socialist. That's the proof that I'm a good person who cares about the poor and the working class because I want them to get stuff via my advocacy of socialism. I'm a capitalist, so officially I'm a good person who cares about people's freedom to, pursue wealth in the free market so that they can get stuff. My way for people to get stuff is more moral than your way for people to get stuff. Meanwhile, the whole crux of both positions is material acquisition. That's the whole crux of it. You can drink, you can do drugs, you can be promiscuous, you can watch porn, you can backbite, you can blaspheme, you can lie, you can break promises, you can doom scroll, you can waste your time, you can be malicious, you can be petty, you can be deceitful, you can be a coward, you can be all of that, no problem. Your official ideology is a substitute for character. You understand? Performance. The morality of style over substance. There's no real belief in anything. Understand this. There's no real conviction that exists in the absence of external observation for them. Because that's the programming. The West never prioritized morality, never prioritized character, not at all. There's only ever been decorative, like I've said many times. And even if you want to be a moral person, the concept itself has been emptied for you, so you don't even know how to do it. So you see, this so-called civilization, this culture, which is inherently so stubbornly primitive, so underdeveloped morally, so underdeveloped intellectually, they're so insular, so provincial, so self-absorbed, it could only ever have spread through violence. And its violence is itself an element of that primitivity and that lack of development, that lack of moral character, that lack of intellectual complexity, that lack of intellectual depth. And that violence, like I said, has always also guaranteed that they never faced correction, that they never had to change. Which also means paradoxically that their violence has rendered them incredibly weak, incredibly feeble. No, it's a monstrously flimsy culture. As again is demonstrated by things like when they debate the Muslims. No, the violence and the power and the wealth that they accumulated by means of the violence and the coercive power has meant that they have never had to build themselves as a society. They never had to build themselves as a people. Understand, this is why you have the three archetypes in the West, the Western archetypes, the tyrant, the collaborator, and the slave. Because it's always about violence and coercive power. It's always about that. And if you don't have the advantage in any sort of power asymmetry, then you acquiesce. Slave or collaboration, not confrontation, not challenge, not rebellion, not even independent construction, parallel construction. Just kowtowing, just surrender, just bandwagoning. 4 out of 5 were serfs. Docile, passive, obsequious. This is the real Western disposition. When you don't see power in truth, when you don't see power in morality, and you worship only violent, coercive power, you as a people will always bow down. Comfort and convenience over conviction, always. See, I know that you'll hear me. Many of you will hear me. You'll like hearing me call out the West. But you only like it because you're not benefiting from being Western the way you would like to be benefiting from being Western. I know that your real issue isn't what the West is or how the West is. It's that you yourself are not at the top tiers of the Western hierarchy. That's the real reason. Just like the people who started America in the first place. You oppose tyranny when you are not the tyrant. See, you listen and you think that I'm talking like I'm your ally. Because you think that I'm against the people who are making your lives miserable. So you think I'm your ally. But I am. It's true. I am. I am against the people who are making your lives miserable. But you are those people. You yourselves are those people.